čo si akoby pôjdeme pozrieť, čo to je rozhovor priamo s tým hlavným game directorom, tým hlavným, tou hlavou v Intrepide, proste so Stevenom, a bolo to akurát u Pirate Softwarea alebo u Tora, alebo kto ho akoby pozná, tiež game developera, ktorý robil akoby predtým v Blizzarde a všade možné, a teraz má nejaké, myslím, svoje studio a streamuje a tak podobne. Bol to nejaký EVE Online, Big Boy, a proste majú rozhovor akoby o budúcnosti celkovo Ashes of Creation a takých ako víziách a týchto veciach. A ja si to spolu s vami pekne idem pozrieť, chat. Tak sa poďme na to pozrieť a rozmýšľam, že tú kameru možno hodím inde, pretože tu podľa mňa budú tie ich kamery. Nie som si istý.
Steven, can you tell everybody in chat who you are while we play Ashes in the background?
Yes, I am Steven Sharif. I am the creative director and founder of Intrepid Studios, creating Ashes of Creation.
Dám vám tu akoby české titulečky zase, aby ste boli spokojný, chat. Moment. Čo tam je? On?
Creation.
Hell yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So what is your day-to-day operations like for you?
Also known as the Duck Lord to, I believe, the goblins in chat.
Duck Lord.
That is true. He summoned a whole bunch of ducks. They are radiant ducklings now. We cannot harm them. Chad has been looking for ducklings around the map, and they're quacking in game now because of you.
We've got to put in some duckling scavenger hunts and Easter eggs into the game that are just like little interactable ducklings that if you manage to find them have a loot container or something.
Are you adding a wish duck? Is that what you're saying?
A wish duckling. Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
Just like enter the server, find the duckling. It's fantastic. All right. So I think the first question I have is, what do your day-to-day operations look like as a game director for such a large project? I've done game director stuff for smaller projects. I've also worked on games going way, way back. So I started in 2004 at Blizzard Entertainment. Then I left there. Did freelance for a long time, came back in 2009, worked there until 2016. Then I worked for Amazon Game Studio on a Lumberyard, which is a game engine, so kind of extended away from games. And then now I own my own studio, do all this, stream games, and try to teach other people to make games as well. And I think it'd be really interesting for people to know, like, what is this like for you working on such a massive scale project?
You know, it is kind of different depending on the phase that we're in and the milestone that we're in. And that might be, you know, not necessarily unique to me. I think that as we move through different stages of the product development, you know, my eye or my need tends to gravitate either towards design, towards art direction, towards engineering, towards DevOps or live ops. You know, it just kind of depends which fire is biggest at the moment, and then my priorities shift. And that can be on a day-to-day basis when we're in a super test and react phase like we are now. Everything's very, very agile. We suspended kind of our sprint status, and we've gone entirely to a Kanban approach so that we can, you know, appropriately prioritize issues as they arise during this live testing. That can be a bit hectic. It is definitely a context switching for me on a literal hourly basis during the day. But, you know, if we were talking about 6 months ago, then it was very much in the design phase and testing of our feature development. And if we were talking about a month ago, it was very much in our DevOps and build process and release train phase, right? Trying to get ready for the testing that we had going then. You know, my job is just to be where I'm needed so that I can offer the direction, the approval, the insight to kind of what the overarching goal and our direction should be so that we can make informed decisions and have alignment amongst the rest of the directors and the team.
Yeah, so effectively trying to keep the vision on track.
That's right.
And that means...
Ja, to je ale mega podstatná akoby celá tá záležitosť, že presne on sa akoby musí trochu vyzdať akoby do všetkého, ale všade budú nejakí tí experti na tú danú akoby vec. Ale proste tá Stevenova vízia, tým, že akoby on pochádza z toho Arcageu, Lineageu a týchto akoby starých ako MMOčiek dosť, aj tam je to na tej vízii úplne brutálne vidieť. A mne sa to ako jednak úplne brutálne páči, ale proste úplne milujem všetky tie non-pay to win na schvál a tieto veci, čo presne akoby často tieto hry ničili. A že to je akoby už tak dlho v developmente, ešte to má taký ako open development v tom, že roky proste tam dávajú každý mesiac updaty, ako čo tam je nové, kde, čo tam navrhli akoby nové a tak ďalej. A ešte to bude trvať a teraz je to v tej Alpha 2 phase, kde sa to dá akoby teoreticky ako kúpiť za $120. Jo, a dá sa to akoby cez víkend si to ako zahrať proste každý víkend. a zahrať si akoby tú Alpha 2 Phase a skúsiť to. Ale nad čím som jako rozmýšľal, ale neviem, či to je úplne teraz ešte worth it za tých 120, no ako neskôr, keď sa stačí počkať, tak potom už to budú aspoň na konci roka, myslím, že nejaké celotýždňové aspoň testy, alebo niečo, čo je ako trochu príjemnejšie možno, ale uvidíme, no.
Switching hats quite a lot.
Ja dúfam, že tu mám nejakých MMO enjoyers do budúcna, s ktorými tam budeme možno niečo ničiť teoreticky na staré kolena, keď to vyjde v roku 2054.
Especially with such rapid development cycle. One of the things that I was really excited about was seeing you get into game and actually talk to people and kind of do the community building stuff. One of the things that I notice a lot of the times right now that's lacking in these large scale MMOs is a developer touch. Just someone coming in and being like, hey, I love that you love the game. Let's do something fun together. And I don't think a lot of people expected that. I think a lot of people really, really liked that, to be honest with you. So
jo, to je vždycky nejlepší, že to je prostě ten hlavný týpek, který to celé financuje, celé to má pod sebou, celé jakoby to má pod sebou, ale tiež chce tú hru urobiť skvelú a je rád, že tam akoby prídu tí ľudia testovať a tak a je tam proste furt, ako neviem, in-game a dá im tam ako odkazy a veci a robí si tam prdel ako proste a tak.
I think that really...
To je proste presne ten prístup, ktorý ja by som ako chcel, ktorý je síce akoby tejto dobe už celku koupiom, pretože tu máme akoby korporácie, ktoré tam ti nikto nič ako pomaly nepovie, ako jo, tam proste, to ti vyjde niečo a hotovo, ako jo.
Really emanates from a player first perspective, right? My background, my history, I wasn't in game development when I started Intrepid. I was just a lover of MMOs. And it was somewhat serendipitous that, living in San Diego, having made a lot of friends at my local game hobby store called Games Empire, I would play Warhammer 40K, Warhammer Fantasy. I would do, tabletop RPG campaigns in Pathfinder and D&D. And I got to know a lot of Sony Online Entertainment devs through that interaction. And being a lover of MMOs, I was always disheartened with kind of, the approach that many publishers took, which didn't seem to put the player first. So from my perspective, that created a kind of window of opportunity to have a more player-centric company come along and, tap into the market share that is the MMORPG gaming community, which was really just looking for a company to preserve the integrity of the game environment that they're playing in, by offering no pay to win, by offering no pay to convenience, and to have the level of insight from the boardroom that all of the developers have with regards to the game development, and not having some, marketing director that doesn't know how games work and how communities want things to be coming in telling the developers what they should be doing. That
Please, presne, proste, to je úplne celá táto doba, akoby o tom, tam niekto určuje budget, niekto určuje tam deadline, nejaký proste publisher alebo niekto a tam sa niekto môže proste tam posrať, aby to urobili a potom to neurobia akoby správne, potom im tam katnú budget, potom tamto, potom to už musia vydať, potom to vydajú na hovno a proste furt nie je tam žiadna ako otvorenosť, nejaká komunikácia medzi tou komunitou, čím všetci negivujú fuck a toto je akoby konečne úplne opačný prístup. I fucking love it.
Was kind of the perspective that I think lends to this interaction that people see right now in Alpha 2. I'm very much involved, and I try to extend that level of involvement down to our development team as well, where they're in the Discord talking with people, they're on streams talking with people, and kind of letting them engage with the community, which not a lot of companies, I think, at our size or at our project size do.
Yeah, so you actually keyed on something really interesting there, the no pay to win, no pay for convenience. What is your overall vision for monetization in this game? Because I think
toto je témička, presne, ak sa vie víziu o monetizácii rovno straight up.
It's kind of core to how people feel about games right now. It's a very hot button issue. Is like, is there any pay to win in this? What level of pay to win is it? How is this for you? What is your vision for this?
So, from a monetization standpoint, my perspective is that games as a service do best when they have a steady level of income, and that is more related to a subscription model. I think that a subscription model is not a high barrier to entry. People can jump in and play the game for a month on a $15 sub fee, see if they like it, it. They don't have to buy the product for a $60 box price. So we don't have a box price associated with Ashes of Creation. It is just a subscription model.
Mega
And then the
pog.
responsibility really lives on the development team to take that investment by the player and to consistently release cadence out new content so that you keep that lifetime value of the players staying subscribed. When it comes to microtransactions, my perspective is that so long as it doesn't touch the integrity of in-game power, that includes things like expanding inventory slots or fast travel or buying stats or anything that is related to your output of influence in the game, that should not be on the marketplace. But if it is purely cosmetic, and just to be clear, even though we're willing and going to be offering purely cosmetic marketplace items, they will not be the best cosmetics that you can acquire either. The best cosmetics.
Yes, môj bože, ďakujem, Stevene, ďakujem. To je ten najväčší pain in the fucking ass, či už je to vole vo Vovku, alebo je to v hoci kde. Tak hoci kde proste sa vole v každom MMOčku, vole za posledných pomalých hrách, za posledných 15 rokov reálne, alebo možno za celú tú dobu, je proste vždycky tá najkrajšia vec, alebo nejaká, čo je úplne fucking epic, alebo niečo vyzerá brutál, alebo nejaký skin, alebo hocičo, tak vždycky je to proste za paywallov, že sa to nedá akoby získať úplne ako in-game len tak a proste potom zrazu akoby všetky tie in-game rewards sú akoby úplne worthless, pretože nevyzerajú tak moc shiny a nie sú tak epic a presne akoby tam treba podľa mňa urobiť ten element, že tie najvzácnejšie veci si musíš proste pofarmiť, musíš vygrindiť, musíš tam akoby proste tomu venovať čas, nemôžeš sa k tomu dostať nijak rýchlejšie za žiadnu akoby cenovku proste, alebo niečo podobné. A keď tam ako niekto bude mať proste vole inú farbu, vole nejakého vole mounta, alebo niečo podobné a nebude mu to dávať predsa ako ja neviem, bonusový vole tam move speed, alebo niečo podobné a bude mať iba vole iného toho, ale pritom budú aj tak krajší mounti, akoby vzácnejší, ktorých si môže získať vo svete a budú viac váženejší. Jo, tyto iba pure cosmetic veci, yes, kľudne.
That you can acquire, I believe, should exist within the game, and that the marketplace.
A okrem toho si myslím, že to je možno fakt ako to najlepšie kombo. Keď sa akoby nad tým zamyslím, tak je to podľa mňa možno najlepšie kombo, ako nastaviť tú monetizáciu akoby v tejto dobe, pretože fakt ako čisto, OK, ten samozrejme, že by všetci chceli úplne ideálnom svete, aby to bolo vole zadarmo všetko a ideme a máme dokonalú hru, akoby, jo, ale žijeme v realite, takže tam musí byť akoby nejaký systém a to, že si nemusí človek kúpiť tú hru, že tam není žiadnych 60-80 dolárov alebo niečo podobné a akoby dané, že si musíš kúpiť tú hru, ale miesto toho proste si fakt ako budeš platiť ten 15 dolárový sub a buď si ho akoby budeš platiť, alebo si ho zaplatíš raz a vyskúšaš to, alebo to proste nezapneš, alebo to proste budeš akoby keď tak platiť a budeš mať aspoň ako istotu toho, že tam, keď tam bude hrať akoby dosť ľudí a tak podobne, takže sa o to budú starať a tak ďalej, no. Za mňa to je akoby veľmi príjemný aj finančne, akoby to není nič náročné pre nikoho, akoby si myslím. Za mňa akoby to je úplne win-win. Aj s tými kozmetikmi a vecami
is a way to provide additional flavor and additional options that players have access to. So our focus is subscription model with a cosmetic marketplace only, no pay to win, no pay to convenience, no box price. In my opinion, that gives the best of both worlds when it comes to low barrier to entry, motivation for the dev team to produce content updates, and no fiddling with the integrity of the in-game achievement.
I'm going to tell you right now, everybody loved that. That's fantastic, man.
W, Steven. Čo to je? Už tam malo, ale v tom čete nemá pristať aspoň jedno. W, Steven. Ne? W, Steven. Chat? Chat, vy sa so mnou nechcete akoby baviť zase. Kde mám tých MMO enjoyers? MMO enjoyers, rise up! Čo tam robí niekde nejaký ty vole ovec alebo niekto ďalší?
So actually something along that line is one of the things that I've been wondering about, a bunch of people have been talking about. There are cosmetic mounts on the store. And
Right.
we know that certain mounts are faster than other mounts. The mount right here is 175% ground speed. We've seen mounts at 135% ground speed. Are the mounts that you buy from the store, are they going to be faster? Is it going to be a skin for mounts? How does this work?
Oh, so you must acquire your mount in game first, and then you can apply a visual skin to it from the store. So it doesn't affect the stat. You can't buy a skin and then summon the skin. You have to first acquire the mount.
Tak toto je ale brutálne skvelé. Že si akoby môžeš, proste, že si akoby nemôžeš si kúpiť proste nejaký mega pekný, ty vole, super, vole, mounta, ty vole, neviem čo, z toho storu. Ale najprv si ho musíš, vole, vygrindiť, vyfarmiť, vole, zaslúžiť. A potom si môžeš kúpiť kľudne akurát ako inú farbu, vole, viac, vole, neviem, obrneného, vole, kokota, whatever, nebude to zvyšovať staty ani nič. Absolútne ďalší W, normálne ďalší win.
The mount stats that you acquire are in-game based off of either animal husbandry system or vendor, or if you're a mayor. And then if you own a skin that you purchased, then you can apply that visual appearance to the mount that you've acquired in-game.
That's awesome. So what is your feeling about regional pricing? Regional pricing is a huge hot button issue, especially with my community. We've got a lot of people from Brazil. We've got a lot of people all over Europe, a lot of people from Australia. And I am very passionate about this subject. So how do you guys want to handle that?
My perspective is that price harmonization.
Tak tam ide vezme iba o tom, akože, že v niektorých tých inak ekonomicky proste založených akoby krajinách, alebo tých, čo majú ako nižšie proste tam veci, tak to tam musia akoby tie ceny nejak inak pohybovať a niekde musia byť ako nižšie a tak podobne. Čo sa ako niekedy, kedy si proste presne abuzovalo na nejakých tých veciach, že si tam niekto ako nakupoval veci cez VPN-ku, lebo si to dal niekde akoby do South America a takéto veci. Ale no,
Organization is a good thing. However, it must be coupled with unique region locks associated with that price harmonization. So when you offer different prices for certain different regions, those prices apply to accounts within that region's publishing. And sometimes that can be handled by a publisher for a territory. The Intrepid is intending to self-publish in North America and Europe, and we are open to obviously partners as we get down the road who share our vision of what Ashes needs to be for territories outside of those areas. But then what I would say is that even though we have price harmonization for those territories, they would be on their own region from an account services perspective.
I actually really like that. So I've got a background in offensive security, and one of the things that we had to fight against all the time was bots. So when you make it so that, say, somebody from...
Toto ma zaujíma presne, ako budú bojovať ako presne s nejakou bot question a takýmito vecami, keď tam nebude box price.
Brazil is paying to only play on the Brazilian servers at the Brazilian price. You're stopping outside entities from just buying a ton of accounts in Brazil and then using those to go and flood the US servers at a cheaper price. That's really a big barrier for that. Yeah, massive for that. So good. Hell yeah. Like right now, there's no soul binding on it.
Že to tam akoby nemôže byť proste tým pádom, keď to bude v tom samostatnom regióne a nebude to moc ako, to je super. Že my tu budeme mať akoby, samozrejme budeme mať Európa, sme akoby OK, že jo, ale sme v cajku, ale tým pádom sa nemôže presne diať to, že tam presne niekto nakúpi, vole, 4859 accountov, vole, bude tam botiť proste na brazilských, ty vole, niečom a potom to proste bude fladovať úplne celú tú ekonomiku nejakých serverov.
Any of the gear? Is that intended game design, or is that something that'll be addressed later?
No, it is intended game design.
Yes, toto je akoby téma o tom Soulbounde, alebo teda tom, že proste to ma zaujíma akoby tá vízia úplne celá od Stevena. Takže ja osobne, čo si akoby myslím o tom teda je, že proste na schvál, aj teraz povedal akoby, že jo, že to tam je akoby na schvál intended, pretože proste to musí byť všetko tradovateľné aj po tom, čo si to oblečeš a tak podobne. Aj kvôli tomu, aby bolo vybalancovaný punish cez ten corruption systém a to PvPčko a tak ďalej, aby to všetko ako fungovalo. Aj proste, ja neznášam všetky tieto veci akoby vo vovenkách a vo veciach a dlho som to nemal rád, že vždycky všetko, čo akoby si oblečeš, už akoby je iba tvoje a potom to môžeš predať iba niekde vendorov alebo niečo a máš nejakú mega super vec, ktorá proste je potom alebo ty ju využívaš, ale aj tak potom tie k hovnu. Akoby pritom tam niečo má byť akoby fakt tak vzácne, že potom ako to využívaš a potom teoreticky to môžeš hodiť na vole druhú postavu, alebo to môžeš predať proste niekde, alebo to ja neviem, hodíš vole kamarádovi do píči alebo niečo také, to mám radšej.
you know, obviously you've done a
A ten kamarád potom to môže vydropovať, lebo bude zabíjať všetkých okolo. Ale
great job in helping to communicate with your community, which is really something that I got to say, you know, Thor, from myself and from Intrepid as a team. We love listening to you because you're very knowledgeable when it comes to game development, having the experience that you obviously have. And it's difficult sometimes to find, you know, content creators with the reach that you have, streamers with the reach that you have, helping to educate communities and, you know, what different phases of development look like, especially from that of an alpha. And when we talk about, you know, the current economy, the systems that are in the game, there are still missing features that relate to this idea of an open economy, which means that very little to no things are intended to be soulbound. They're all a part of an open economy, which are missing a few features in phase one. As we know, phase one is about, you know, stability and performance. And as we enter into phase two and phase three, some of those additional features and systems will come online, one of which is deconstruction, tempering over enchantments. Those are expected to sink open economy items out of the economy to help kind of reach that balance between the faucets and the sinks.
So with that in mind, if items are intended to not have soul binding, how is your team going to effectively plan to fight RMT? For those who don't know, that's real money transaction, which means if I find a really good item and I want to sell it to another person, I can trade money outside of the game to trade that item to them. And I've had to fight that fight, and it's very tough, especially when those...
jo, tyva, no, jakoby s týmto presne, jakoby to viac menej ovládlo úplne celú ekonomiku Vovka, jakoby presne toto, ten real money trading.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, what I would say is, first and foremost, we are going to be investing heavily in our GMs and in our CS teams, which we have a plan, and we have some rudimentary elements of that plan currently in alpha that relate to player heat mapping, action heat mapping, and kind of RMT flags that will then cause some investigative things to occur on our side. This is something that I think has to be done in order to preserve the integrity of the economy of the game.
Nice.
RMT is obviously, even in a game where you had 100% soulbound, can still be done, whether that be through things like power leveling, purchasing accounts, you know, whatever it might be. A soulbound approach to the economy doesn't solve that per se. You still have to, as a company, choose to invest in combating those things. And I think many players who played in this genre know that at some point the lights get turned off for many publishers around making those investments. However, you know, that's not our mandate. Our mandate is to ensure that in order to provide a environment where integrity matters, we have to be willing to invest not just in the tools that discover these types of things, but also in the CS response that includes the GM's availability.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mega, ty vole, prostě, fakt jako je... Ono to všetko sice znie jako Brutal Copium, ale prostě to znie tak dobre, celá ta vízia od Stevena, že já jsem normálně vzrušený.
And like, that's a cat and mouse game.
Yep.
For anybody who doesn't understand, you're like, oh, it's going to be full of RMT, it's going to be full of bots. It will, and they'll be fighting it, and they'll evolve their strategy, and then the opponents will evolve their strategy, and it just goes back and forth. It is a never-ending battle. That never
Jo, to prostě urobíš nějaké ty věci, nějaké, vole, oponenty, nějak tam niečo zablokuješ a potom akoby si ľudia nájdu zase cestu, ako to prostě omrdať a tak podobne. A zase sa musí akoby niečo upraviť, aby to bolo, to je prostě úplne konštantný súboj furt a je akoby super, že tam Steven akoby s tým už počíta a je to, že hej, prostě je to niečo, do čoho kurva budeme muset jako investovat viac. Jo, iné firmy akoby prostě dávajú na druhú kolej potom, ale si uvedomuje, že ak chce jako udržet integritu tej hry, takže to prostě musí do toho akoby investovat, do těch jako game masterova ľudí a času, aby to tam jako riešili a viděli a tak podobně. Čo je celku brutál.
It only ends when the developer or the publisher says, all right, I'm done. Go do what you want.
Yep. And on top of that, it's also highly organized. All of the gold sellers you see across all of the games you've ever seen, largely part of the same mega groups that actually do this. It's not just some kid in his basement. The grand majority of it is done by very efficient, very automated groups that make a ton of money doing it.
Yeah. And to be fair, you know, it's actually very harmful to the company as well, because oftentimes those bad actors are using fraudulent financial information in order to acquire the accounts necessary to facilitate the high bot counts that they do, which, as we know from a merchant services perspective, obviously, as those chargebacks occur, as that fraudulent activity happens, it can be very costly to the company. So it actually behooves us to make sure that we're on top of our game by stopping those bad actors at the edge,
Nice.
first and foremost, and then catching very quickly the signatures that can help identify them.
Yeah, most definitely. I'm really glad. This is good. This is good for me to hear. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk about guilds. Right now, we are a massive guild on this server, right? We've got 40 sub-guilds. All of them are completely full. So we've got 30 people in every single one of those guilds.
Už teraz na Alfe 2 má svojich pirátov, ktorá má 40 guild už. 40 guild. Každá po 30 ľuďoch, čo je tam teraz akoby max akurát.
Guilds. How is it that you guys are planning to either embrace or combat this kind of behavior? Because really, at the end of the day, we are a Zerg guild. We are. Massive community, tons of people on the server, and this can be intimidating for others.
Well, I think there's a few things that go into that. That's a big question.
Yep.
So first and foremost, we don't have all of our guild progression in the game yet. That means that, guilds have the ability to acquire certain resources, which then get invested into the guild progression system that allows the guild to kind of choose two different paths at each level. Either they're going to have the expanded member allotment, or they can invest in passive skills and other features that the guild has access to. So,
toto je nice, toto som úplne miloval popravde, akoby presne aj na Lineage, a to bolo aj vo Vovenku chvíľku a tak, že tá gilda má proste nejaké svoje pasívne bonusy alebo veci, čo si tam akoby môžeš dať a môžeme sa akoby ako gilda proste vždycky dohodnúť, že hej, ale chceme tu teraz, nafarmili sme tu spoločne pekne, ja neviem, vymyslím si v cirkuse, level 2 gildu a môžeme si dať plus, 50 HP pre všetkých, ty vole, alebo chlapci, zobereme tuto 3 členov akoby navíc teda. Jo, a takto akoby si to budeš môcť akoby nejak tak ako kombinovať a budú robiť nejakú veľkú gildu bez nejakých pasiviek, povedzme, alebo tak, alebo s tým, alebo mať proste menšiu, ale giga strong proste gildu. Yes.
Guilds have to kind of make a decision. Do we want to go more members, or do we want to go more power from a passive and or resource?
Yes, takže sa bude môcť dať akoby urobiť možno aj kvalita nad kvantitu, čo som vždycky ako mal rád aj na Lineage proste v tom, že niekedy áno, tam proste prišiel nejaký ruský zerk, ty vole proste fakt ako stoviek, ty vole proste postav, čo si ako s nejakou jednou partou proste neumlátil, ani keď ty vole sa ti rozpadli ruky. Ale zase na druhú stranu boli tam proste veci, kde si s jednou partou mohol vymlátiť vole zo 3 alebo niečo také, keď si to mal akoby dobre koordinované, alebo si mal proste fakt ako ich nafarmené jak svinia s megagírom, dobre si bol proste ready a tak podobne a ten animáci boli niečo ako mediocre, tak si to proste rozsekal kľudne s ako dobrou partou proste, no.
Perspective. So that doesn't solve it, right? Because obviously if you're well organized, and I was very well organized in the guilds that I used to run in my MMOs, I would have my department of agriculture, I would have my engineering core, I would have my strike team and my task forces, and they all operated on different TeamSpeak servers. This was back in the day. And I would have a commander for each one of those, and they would report to me. It was a very organized structure, right? So it's not difficult to essentially delegate that power off into different organizations. However, what we do then to kind of combat that is in our encounter design, when it comes to events that actually leverage guild structures, such as node sieges, node wars, guild wars, and castle sieges, we intend to provide objectives that not just relate to the number of people that you have, but also limit some of the participation to group size objectives within these larger events that can turn the tide of power in the event. So in that situation, we have...
Yes, a to znie dobré, aj keď neviem, ako to v realite bude úplne vybalancované, ale moje chápanie teda akoby je niečo, že že aj keď tam bude nejaký large scale event, proste, kde tam budú desiatky ľudí a tak, a niekto by tam proste nabehol s 50 proti 2 partám, tak prostě by to jako nemalo šancu, ale budou tam přesně nějaké jakoby body, kde se dostane len jakoby jedna parta, alebo počet iba jako jednej party a tam to můžu jakoby ufajtit a vyhrát len tie dôležité menšie body a můžu jakoby vyhrát jakoby s kvalitou nad kvantitou, jakoby povedzme, to by bylo dokonalé.
Have mechanics that kind of start to mitigate the amount of benefit that can come from a numbers perspective. Now, that doesn't entirely remove the numbers perspective. There are other features that intend to kind of make it more difficult for larger organizations to take advantage of distributing their player base across multiple guilds. And that is the idea that when guilds own a thing, whether that be a castle or a guild hall, you are limiting the reach that that power has to influence that group of people. So if I just said, no, we're going to let guilds be 1,000 in size, then what we're doing is we're allowing the power that we want to provide guilds from the castle ownership or from the guild hall ownership or from the freehold system to be delegated out then to all 1,000 of those members. But when we start to bring that down in size, now there's a competition for the scarcity of resources and there's an opportunity for political betrayal. I can't tell you how many times in the games that I played where that's...
Šibeníku, ďakujem pekne za Prime Sub. Neviem, prečo sa tam nezobrazil akoby teraz. Alebo zobrazil? Nezobrazil, ne? Ale mal by. Ale ďakujem.
Scarcity of benefit has caused rifts between my commanders or between, different groups within the guild that then can potentially erupt in a civil war, right? And those are the types of player emergent behaviors that we want to encourage by introducing these systems of soft friction where people compete for things.
Yeah, that makes sense completely. I actually love that. So I came from Eve on...
Tu je. Ďakujem nádherne, pane Šibeníku. Vitaj. Ďakujem za Prime Suba.
I played EVE Online for about 15 years.
Jo, a ještě předtím jakoby k tomuto půjdeme, ale toto je přesně jakoby záležitost, kde hlavně to, že tam ta vízia toho, že ten svět bude obrovský a bude to tam jakoby, víš, co si tam potom jako najdeš ty věci a tak tým, že tam nechcú mať žiadny fast travel a ja jakoby to brutálne schvalujem, protože tým pádom sa tam nemôže stať to, že tam bude nejaký veľký jeden zerg alebo niečo ovládať prostě celú mapu alebo polku mapy alebo niečo, protože kurva im bude trvať hodinu sa dostať od jedného bodu do druhého a už medzi tým sa to jakoby tam bude to, takže to bude také jako viac koncentrované a bude sa s menšou grupou. Si potom úplně viem predstaviť, že si tam s cirkusom, normálne tuto čete, normálne ovec, bude náš, neviem, tank, neviem, Bart, bude tam vyspevovať, to je jedno, čo bude. Prostě ovec bude mať na starosti financie našej dediny. Neviem, či mu to dáme ovcovi, ale možno jo. Dáme mu na starosti ekonomiku celú na našej dediny jednej, čo si tam nájdeme a urobíme si tam jednu úplne brutál záležitosť. Spojíme to tam ešte možno s nejakými ďalšími, rozumiete, tam jako klaníkmi, nejaké tie priateľské vzťahy a tak a potom to ovládneme celé, no alebo no tak. Utračím to všetko za chlast a devky, teda budu, ale záleží, jak budu jakoby ku nám do dediny chodiť hráči na chlast, devky a chlebíčky, tak jakoby zase to bude dobré možno ovec, víš co?
I was the alliance leader of Strybug. Clade was about 1,200 players. We had to move all around the map, highly organized strike teams. Usually in those teams, it's between 5 and 15 people. So I'm very used to this kind of gameplay. That's exactly what I was hoping for. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Because yeah, Zerging, that kind of stuff, that only happened when we were in massive fleet battles. But when you're doing that, it's not 300 versus 300. It's tons of groups of 5 versus tons of groups of 5, all on the same battlefield together.
Jo, aj tak to bolo aj proste v Lineage, že to bolo viac menej proste fakt ako rozdelené na party a aj keď to bolo ako vo finále nejaké 100 na 100, tak to bolo pri tom ako, ktorá parta prebila tú druhú a tam sa ako posúvaš a ako to a v ten jeden moment ako by tam sa nemlátilo všetci. No.
Yes,
so you have to individually organize those. We use things like TeamSpeak, we use Discord, we use all kinds of different stuff to be able to do this. And it was incredibly important to pull it off that way because if you didn't, you just get owned, man. Like you have to be more organized. Yeah.
Ja to nechcem pauzovať moc, lebo to má 2 hodiny samo o sebe, tu budeme do zajtra.
We can encourage those things is we can put specific group-based encounters within that broader ecosystem of the engagement, right? That gives some power to the guilds that instead chose to focus on a smaller, tight-knit core group and
To
go
sme my, chat! Steven hovorí o nás, čete! Menšia organizovaná skupina, ktorá bude chcieť mať dedinu s chlastom, devkami a chlebíčkami. No ale...
on the path of higher passives and benefits instead of group membership. And now they're better positioned to win those group v group engagements potentially because they have that choice of the power tree. So that's an important part of the guild progression. The other thing I want to note is that, like, you know, from my from my perspective, two games that I really enjoyed playing, Lineage 2 and Arcade. In Arcade, you know, my guild that I started back in like 2003 and since resigned when I started.
Důležitá otázka, dá se ve hře sbírat obilí? Obecně si zase myslíš, že skončíme na tom istom, ako sme skončili na New World, jako jo? Že budeme chodit a budeme hlavní sběrači. Ale jo, máš tam normálně, že jo, harvesting, prostě. Aj, že jo, klasický wood, vole, cutting a všetko. Budeme prostě normálně mať, budeme ovládať ekonomiku celého, prostě si nájdeme oblast, kde bude najviac nejakých obilných alebo nejakých jedných resursov a budeme ovládať celý server na základě obilia. Oh, yes.
Intrepid as its leader. We had, you know, 1,500-ish people on our server, and we broke that up into multiple guilds. And on Curios, for the first, like, the name of our server, for the first 6 months, we owned every raid boss. We were the first to do the raid bosses. Every time it spawned, we did all the raid bosses. So we were getting all this gear, right? And over time, you would see the resistance on the server would just mount more as people would catch up until the point where it was this full-blown war of the entire server against our guild. And eventually the ship righted itself, right? The haves versus the have-nots, they started to reach the struggle point, and then it dispersed, and the guild got overturned. But like, that is the type of interesting political environment that is, I think, very compelling and gets some level of emotional investment from the players who are a part of that scenario, you know, working to change the paradigm of the political environment on their server. That's a fun experience.
Yeah, no,
Ja si napríklad ako by pamätal, ale presne toto bola úplne tá krása aj na tých lineageoch a týchto veciach, že to nám dali občas vymysleť proste nejaké viece, ktoré boli absolútne gosu, a to bolo, že bol nejaký, ja neviem, veľký, na nejakom serveri sme boli a na to bola proste nejaká najväčšia gilda, proste jak svinia, alebo proste klan, ktorý bol rozdelený na milión nejakom podmenších ako klanov a tak ďalej. A ty si proste ako, vedel si proste, čo ja viem, čo akoby samozrejme budú chcieť robiť a tak podobne a ovládali tam všetkých tých najväčších bossov a tak. Ale proste vedel si, akoby rozdeliť, ich bolo akoby síce veľa, ale keď už sa niekde sústredili, tak si vedel, čo ja viem, vychytať, neviem, čo ja viem, posledných 10 minút alebo niečo nejakého času, keď končil nejaký Castle Siege alebo niečo podobné. Ja akoby proste tam nikto na nich neútočil, čo ja viem, tie 3 hodiny alebo 2 hodiny na ten hrad a nikto sa to ani nesnažil od nich dobiť, proste, pretože každý vedel, že to nemá zmysel. Tak oni už tam čo aj neboli, proste na tých posledných 10 minút tam nechali zo pár ľudí, potom aby to tam ako iba proste skončilo a hotovo. A my sme presne, čo ja viem, čakali a ešte na schvál niekde inde sa proste diali nejaké veci a vypisovali sme a potom sme zobrali jednu partu a proste sme alebo to boli možno 2 alebo 3 party, ale to bol nejaký menší hrad, niekde aj tak. A tam sme im to proste išli vymlátiť. A získali sme to, kým sa tam oni akoby stihli ako presunúť zase naspäť a naportiť postupne, tak sme to tam nejak ako vymlátili proste a niečo a na nejakých pár dní sme mali proste ten ich jeden menší hrad proste alebo niečo a úplne si myslím, že kľudci, môže vás byť vole pokokot. Ale proste boli tam akoby dobré moves občas, no.
Super agree with that. It's one of the things I was telling people before is some of the best gameplay that I ever had in EVE Online was in small, tight-knit groups where we're highly efficient, just picking at a really large enemy. Because you can be more efficient, you can be more skilled in a tiny group and just do a lot of damage to a large guild or a large, in that case, it's alliance and corporation because they just can't move as fast, you know? And you get in, you get out, you steal something, you kill something and
Jo, presne, to budeme nové my z ovčákov. Budeme jedna super infiltrovaná super parta, normálne na bušencov, ktorá jednak bude zbierať obilie akoby 90% času, ale potom, keď nám niekto bude zbierať to obilie, Tak ty krásu, bude rychlá akce, celá parta, bum, prás, vytrieskat ty vole, obilí, jak chceš sbírat typku, já ti dám! Pém, jdeme, fuk, jedem, Toňo, všetci z tej gildy, instantne, ty vole, war, mávame koš, hoci koho vidíte, kill on sight.
And you just have a bunch of groups doing this, and you attrition them down out of the war, you know? And that may not look like a bad thing, but when you got a...
Čete, dúfam, že tam budete potom so mnou. Keď to vyjde v tom roku 5239, čete, ja vás tam budem potrebovať každého jedného. To bude nová éra.
Groups doing that, man, it's rough.
Absolutely. And another key point, you know, about the Zerg mechanics, right? A big issue that I think that help Zergs be Zergs is the ability to easily fast travel throughout the world, right?
Yep.
In Ashes, we don't have that ability, right? You cannot easily fast travel throughout the world. And that is an intended game design, again, to mitigate the response from these large number organizations that may not focus as much on subterfuge or espionage because they have the numbers, right? But they don't have the organization or the skill. And that is the textbook definition of what a Zerg is. So fast travel is an additional component that helps to mitigate. There's not one particular solution or mechanic to a Zerg. There is a confluence of solutions that make it more difficult to Zerg. But ultimately, in an MMORPG, numbers are relevant, right? And to a degree, they are a mandate of power. So, you know, you can't entirely stop it, but you can put a lot of hoops that they need to jump through in order to manage that large of an organization, which then just introduces the likelihood that that organization will at some point fall apart or be susceptible to some type of political intrigue.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you going to do when one of those really large guilds also has a very well-trained EVE Online spy corps? I mean, just theoretically, just theoretical. You know, definitely
just
not
theoretically,
something that's
just
theoretically, just a little bit.
Like I said, there's not one solution.
To si ale pamätám takisto, že toto sa robilo presne v tých akoby starých MMOčkách tiež, že to sa úplne vytratilo s tou dobou. A to je to, že si fakt ako že si proste posielal ako zvedov a proste špiónov do akoby iných tých veľkých, do tých nepriateľských guild a tak podobne. Jo, že si proste fakt ako sa dohodol, sa tam vytvorila nejaká postava a to sa niečo to dalo a ten týpek sa proste na tej postave si sa tváril na schvál, že si proste nejaký vole iný, neviem kto, vole random a potom si tam chvíľku v tej guilde bol, chvíľku si ako pomáhal a potom si ako dával informácie, reálne vždycky vedel, že oni píšu akoby do guilde, že idú na tohto a tohto bossa a zrazu sme sa tam objavili my, akoby pekne ako celá tej vole guilda, alebo vole, ja neviem, parta, alebo dve party a zrazu sme ich tam vytrieskali a zabili sme to, jo. Tieto takéto špionážne veci, to boli ako sneaky píky, ale bolo to super.
There's a number of different things that make it difficult.
Oh, it's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun. So let's see. Are there any plans to bring mayor and guild systems together more rather than being two separate systems?
You know, I think that in the Venn diagram of overlap, there is obviously some overlap between guild affiliation and node citizenship and mayorship. But as the game continues to expand and as we introduce more nodes, that is going to become something that's more increasingly difficult in order to kind of manage from a guild influence perspective. There's a reason why mayorship, citizenship, and guilds are intended to be separate. Guilds I view as very much a territorial, I own this thing, my guild is the owner of these things.
Áno, cirkus bude ovládať proste tam nejaké pole, alebo niečo, čo si vybereme.
Like that in EVE. Yeah, sovereignty was like that in EVE. Exactly that.
And nodes are really not intended to be that space. Nodes are intended to be content hubs that any player has access to, whether that content is, narrative arcs that send you out into the world and the POIs around you, whether that be housing that you have access to, or artisanship services, or vendor tables. Like, these are things that should players choose to be a citizen, they have access to be. Now, this brings in the concept of what's called pseudo factions. And again, we are not a faction-based game by design. However, we do introduce many mechanisms by which pseudo factions can come to be. And the reason for that is because these pseudo factions help create player friction, which relate to the last conversation we just had, the last question, right? How do we soft introduce opportunities where players' interests can be at odd. Even within their guild organizations, if you have a node that half of your members are a part of and a node that another half of your members are a part of, and you have an adversary who is aware of this, they can start to pit interests against one another because of the scarcity of resource design. So by that truth, we want nodes to be part and separate from guilds. We want social organizations to be part and separate. We want religions to be part and separate, right? These are all competing progression paths.
Dobrý ovec, takže môžeš byť normálne full-time harvestor, ty vole, proste, a budeš si môcť, jo, bude to otvorené, víš co, a potom prídeš do nejakého toho mesta a budeš tam, že jo, ja som ten obilný chlapec. To som ja. Prichádzam. Konečne už vám nebude chýbať nič.
That don't have really a strong relationship with guilds.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I like that. I think it's interesting to have separate systems like that because then it's not all, as you said, based around the biggest guild. That was one of the things that really attracted me to the node system right off the bat, was an EVE Online sovereignty basically meant I own this area of nullsec, get out or we kill you, right? And it was up to them to defend it. You could always sneak in and all kinds of stuff, but if they were, an on their toes adversary, they'd be able to stop that, roll all the wormholes, stop you from getting in. And in this case, it's like, no, I live here. We all live here. Yes, and those guys are trying to break it, so let's all fight them, right? And I really like that.
Takže tam jakoby nemusíme být úplně v té jisté jako gildě, ale hej, někdo nám tu vole ničí, tuto našu dědinu, alebo někdo, tak prostě se všetci spojíme a jdeme to bránit. Prostě,
it's more of an inclusive system while still having player-to-player tension, even if you're part of the biggest guild or running solo, and I like that.
I think the name of the game there is conflict and interest, right?
Yeah.
We want to provide a lot of opportunities for there to be a conflict in interest, because when those types of decisions have to get made, that is an emotional investment from the player. That is something that's emergent. That is something that provides the dilemma, which is to a degree pretty fun, and makes for very interesting, non-prescriptive, predictable outcomes.
Yeah. So here's an interesting one. In EVE, Spycraft is very big. We know Spycraft is going to be huge in this as well. And Spycraft is like, I go and make an alt, I join your faction, I get intel from the inside, and then I'm able to feed back to my own people. Maybe I steal some things. Maybe I scout your position and give that away, and then we turn on you in PvP. There's so many different ways to disrupt with Spycraft. How is Ashes going to handle this? Because in EVE, we had something called a player API, but that fit into the game world. It was like, I can read your in-game mails, I can see all the trades you've ever done, and I can see all of your skills. And the reason they did that was it's counterplay. So if I had a really good spy detection team, they'd look through all this stuff and try to identify where you have screwed up in your logs. Or you could try to hide it by making a totally clean alt and try to, ferment it, as we would call it, for a great deal of time so that it looked like you were a normal player and that it wasn't an alt. There's so many ways to play the cat and mouse game there, and I'm worried that there's no counterplay to this kind of behavior in Ashes right now.
Yeah, I think that's a big question.
Yeah.
So when there's a number of different mechanisms at play when it comes to spying or subterfuge, and there are some safeguards against where we feel that we need to kind of curtail that gameplay to a degree. One of those things is citizenship and needing to own housing within a node before you can become a citizen. There is account-wide housing ownership restrictions as well. So that limits kind of the breadth of potential intrigue that one account has access to. There are levels of obfuscation that we even see in PvP right now with regards to like health plates and targeting plates with things. That is also true with the types of caravans that we intend to deploy that can have visual indicators of cargo being taken on them with certain decoy cargo.
To je mega dobrý nápad. Ty píč, si predstavte, že presne tam ideme prepravovať vole z jednej dzedziny do druhej dzedziny, ideme prepravovať náš karavan jeden, vole, ideme ho brániť. Ale tušíme, že niekto tam, ty vole, smrdí od nás, niekto nás, ty vole, ide normálne, niekto nás určite ide na prášev, niekto nám to tu ide vystýlovať, tak tam dáš akoby fejkový proste karavan, alebo fejkový ako ľud nejaký ako do toho. a uvidíš toho týpka, jak tam přijde a bude ti to chcet vylutit a ty tam budeš úplně jo, týpku, tak pojď se, pem, pum. Okay.
So that you can have decoy caravans
Sounds
or decoy
good.
merchant ships that may not have things on them. There is registration periods where
Debated.
for a castle siege or for a node siege that the mayor or the castle lord has governance over participation and approves individual people as being a part of certain sides. There are permission restrictions. Who has the ability to activate certain respawn locations during a castle siege, or who has the ability to allow for ports to exist within the castle siege level design. There's a lot that goes into kind of picking and choosing which dials we want players to have access to from an espionage perspective, and which dials will just make it too difficult for that counterplay to exist against the espionage. That is obviously something that we're going to continue to tune. The balance pendulum always swings, right? It is a constant thing that you want to be cognizant of. Make sure you're collecting player feedback, watching what their actions are, and you never, send that pendulum full swing. You always increment it in different directions to kind of find the sweet spot. So, like all systems, whether it be related to espionage, the subterfuge, just counterplay design, these confluence of systems need to come together to find a healthy resting place that the players can engage with. And it's our job to make sure we're constantly inspecting and iterating to ensure that that balance is met.
So somebody asked something interesting in chat, kind of related to nodes and node leadership and ownership like this. Right now, we only have the ability to vote in our mayor, which makes it a popularity contest. What is ahead for other types of nodes? Because
To som tam niekde videl, že tam majú byť nejaké 4 typy alebo niečo, ne?
I've read a bunch of things in the
To
forum.
niečo bude podľa nejakého quest, náboženský nejakých vecí, tam niečo podľa money čisto, alebo tak. A
But I'd like to hear your take on this.
Yeah, there are 3 additional election methods that have yet to be implemented, as we are, of course, in phase 1. And those election methods relate to kind of an oligarchical, a combat, and a quest-driven kind of performance perspective. Right now, you're experiencing the scientific election method, which is a purely democratic process. That is for the scientific node type. The economic node type is related to an auction system for the mayorship, which...
Ty vole, to je ono, budeme ovládať normálne celú ekonomiku nad obilím alebo niečím, čo si vybereme. A potom vybereme si presne nejaké mestečko, ktoré tam bude mať čím viac peňazí. Ideme na to.
Players can pool their interest in node currency towards electing a mayor. And
obilný oligarcha ovec.
Then you have on the military side, there is a repeating arena of mayoral candidates that can have assigned a number of supporters who participate in a node-wide arena, like once during each week of the election process. And then they acquire a number of points based off of their deaths and kills and participation against the other combatants. And then there is finally a religious node type.
Ten kombatový znie dobre, že proste si fakt ako arénou a malými týmami proste musíš vymlátiť to, že budeš mať teoreticky majora, alebo proste budeš mať na starosti tie veci.
Which is intended to provide a kind of repeatable interaction with these temples and shrines in the religion system across the world through dedicating resources, time towards those quest events to raise to the top of the contribution ladder.
I love that.
That's
going to bring a lot of really interesting gameplay into that. Is there a way you can choose what kind of node yours is, or is that just luck of the draw?
So nodes are pre-populated, and you choose which ones you become a citizen of. So we designate node locations and type, and that obviously is so that when we tie our adaptive and dynamic spawner systems for whether it be props or monsters or quests or narrative or whatever it is, those things we want to make sure we have a footprint of node type so that we can relate the narrative structures to them. and then players just go around and they can choose which ones they want to be a part of. The benefit there as well is that we kind of prevent a certain meta from forming in the world where one type is expected over another due to player population. Instead, there is a vassal system that kind of governs how nodes preclude other nodes from advancing within this vassal structure. And by pre-populating these node types, we can ensure a better diversity of landscape across each of the realms.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yes.
All right, let's switch
Znie
over
mega
to
dobré.
PvP. A lot of people have been complaining about PvP balance in terms of 1v1. What is your guys' approach for balancing when you have a game with 64 archetype combinations?
Yeah, our balance approach is group v group. So
Nice. To je good, actually. Jako jo, za mňa nikdy nebolo bad, keď si mal proste nejaký 1v1 súboj, ktorý si ako nemohol vyhrať s nejakou klásou proti nejakej. Ale zase akoby na tú boli nejaké country a je lepšie to akoby mať vždycky okolo proste akoby tej grupy, protože ono by to proste zase by sa dostali do toho, že by to nešlo nikdy vybalancovať a išlo by tam o to, že by sa museli ako furt znižovať nejaké ako dobré veci, prečo by akoby tí ľudia hrali niektoré tie klásy a proste to celý taký ako divný boj v tom balancovaní, kde group v group balance je za mňa ako lepší, no.
we expect, we embrace, and we are welcoming of the rock, paper, scissors design for 1v1s. There are going to be certain matchups where there is a significant advantage for one archetype or one class over another.
Jo, to akoby čo aj nejaký tank bude mať ako mega výhodu proti nejakému rangerovi do piči, ktorý mu bude robiť so šípami hovno a proste, alebo niečo podobné, jo, alebo to proste je basic, akoby, jo, že nejaký, ty vole, ja neviem, Bard 1v1 nebude asi úplne tak dokonalý ako nejaký mage, ty vole, alebo niečo podobné. Bude nejaká česká gildia na novej Classic, 100% nebude, ale ja tam určite akoby nebudem. Aj keď ako jo, videl som akoby tam, kde je nový akoby Classic a veci a to, ale na to nemám.
In a 1v1 situation, and that's
Ale možno akoby Karel bude niečo robiť, alebo tu budú určite CSK guildy, ktoré tam pôjdu, ako 100%.
okay. That pendulum will swing as well over time, but it's primarily adjudicated by role, right? That defines kind of these interactions. But our goal from a balance perspective is we can always say and expect to the players, if you have a full group versus another full group, then predicated on that group composition, that's how we balance essentially our PvP.
Makes sense. Oh, for the people who are saying, like, what about corruption? It's permanent now. It's actually not. I also thought it was as well. And I went and I actually went and put in a bug report for it because we didn't see it moving. And after grinding for about 30 minutes, it actually slowly fell away. So killing monsters does reduce it now. That is the thing that works.
There may be a couple of, we did just do some changes. The corruption system has been something that we have prioritized iteration on over the course of these last few weeks. As of course, there is a competing, problem with corruption right now in the sense that
Bolianko, myslím si, že Arcade Bulls mal určite akoby nejakú komunitu alebo na Discorde alebo niečo a tam podľa mňa majú furt funkčnú niečo akoby okolo klasiku.
One, it's not fully feature complete, but two, we're also in a temporary phase of development being in alpha where a lot of player perspective on their gear potential loss and or progression loss that corruption is supposed to deter for is just not as strong hitting in an alpha environment where people are willing to lose their characters. So, in that sense, we're gonna balance a little bit, perhaps overbalance for corruption during the testing period, and then as we enter into more permanent phases of testing, such as alpha phase 2 and alpha phase 3 or beta, that's where we feel we can take the reins off a little bit. The other thing is, as you know this, the velocity of development is usually corollary to the amount of bugs that can be introduced.
Yep.
So the faster we go, the higher the likelihood is we might introduce bugs. That sounds like it's a bug because the intended experience is that as you have a corruption score, and corruption score is granted by killing other non-combatants, that corruption score whittles away slowly based off of experience gained or death had. So in those two scenarios, you're expected to. Now, we did introduce a feature that we have talked about for a long time called Blight. Blight is essentially a cumulative PK score that gets kept track of as a stat on your character. And even if you have no corruption, but you killed 30 people over the last 5 days and you worked off that corruption, your 31st kill will accrue much faster corruption, and so will your 32nd and 33rd, regardless of your corruption states. So that is intended to help kind of curtail the amount of corruption that's happening. Now, there will be a religious-based quest that through the investment of resources and time, players can reduce that cumulative score to bring themselves back down.
So with that in mind, have
Čisto jakoby fakt Sin Eater z Lineage 2.
you seen the behavior known as corruption baiting that players are talking about? This new behavior, it's kind of a degenerate gameplay mode where basically what people are doing is you go to engage on someone in PvP and then a whole bunch of non-PvPers rush out and just stand there. So if you AoE, you get corruption for killing them as well as killing
There is supposed to be a setting that, and it might be bugged right now. There's supposed to be a setting right now in the UI. Excuse me. There's supposed to be a combat setting that allows you to, by default, not affect non-flagged players with AoEs.
Yes.
So even if you're
To sa
force
abusovalo
flagged,
furt, presne, ty vole, v hocičom takom.
that setting only applies the targeted spell against other flagged or corrupted players. So it's something we have to look at. But the intent there is to get more granular control over that for the player.
Good. That's really good. Because we'd been seeing that where it's like, oh, a guy's coming over with PvP and he's surrounded by 5 people who aren't flagged. I see what you're doing. It's like, just run away. It's time to leave,
For now, I would say don't use AoE abilities when killing those players. Just use focused single target abilities.
Yep. Plays a mage. No lightning for me, unfortunately. So this is kind of the elephant in the room. There's a lot of people in this community that come from Asmongold's community. A lot of people, we share audience quite a bit. Asmongold tried to sign into the server today. He got out there at level 1. You signed on.
The
told
bald
people
just
to stop
preberali.
attacking the bald one, which is deeply hilarious to me. And I was there and I was talking to him on his channel as well, like from his chat. And he ended up basically getting just absolutely wildly attacked by tons of players at level 1 in the starting zone. And players thought that this was valid gameplay. But one of the things that I tried to explain to people is in EVE Online, they actually have a whole section of the game where you just do a quest right in the very beginning. It's instanced off. And if you go in it and, kill players right in the very beginning, that's actually a bannable thing in EVE. Like nothing is bannable in EVE, but that is bannable in EVE. And it's one of the things that's really interesting about this is some people tried to say that it was some sort of preferential treatment for doing that, but to be real with you, if it's banned in EVE, it's probably really goddamn toxic is the way that I felt about it. So let's hear your take on this. How do you feel about this whole scenario and what do you want to improve with the game?
That was unfortunate. So there was stuff going on in the background that people weren't aware of. So essentially, I was watching Asmongold getting ready to log in. And of course, we're in phase 1. So not all the features are online. Not all of our mechanics are online, right? This is us making sure we're getting heavy loads on the servers, us testing our network, us testing the performance and getting out the major bugs, right? I've talked about this in the past. There is intended to be some safety measures when it comes to interacting with the open flagging system, the open world flagging system.
To môžem trochu preskočiť, to sme fakt ako pozerali viac menej včera, akoby celé.
Knowing that Asmon was going to log in, I fully expected that this was going to be the case. So I was trying to summon him out of the zone, but unfortunately,
tomu nešlo, to sme tam tiež mali, že to nešlo.
Of that individual worker, whether that be a social service or tracking service, we had an inundation of player population on the login worker.
You mean Asmongold logged in and it flooded players?
Just flooded players onto the server. So we also had, at the same time, we had turned up the verbosity on our logging for the social service because we're having some trouble with it. And that was meaning that my RPC, which was summoned player, was making it to the server, but to the service, but was falling apart when it was trying to get down to the server. So I couldn't summon him out of the situation. And then on top of that, I went there and I was like, I was trying to just tell people with the good-heartedness, I'm like thinking, okay, these are all people that have paid good money to be a part of,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
long alpha process where they're going to get their, their feedback implemented, and we're gonna be working with these testers. Surely, if I am passionately implore them, hey, don't grief this player, whether they're a streamer or not, really doesn't matter. Don't grief this player off of playing the game,
Oh, yeah.
because no game can exist if that's your first time user experience. And we're
Jo, to je presne akoby to, že ale tam bude toľko Asmon haters nejakých s tou veľkou komunitou, že proste tam budú ľudia, ktorí to budú robiť na schvál kvôli tomu. No.
missing the components to protect those players. So I started sending out messaging that was just like, stop attacking the bald one. So my perspective on this is that
Funniest way to do it, dude.
The bald one.
PvP is good. Griefing is bad. Griefing is an actionable offense. What's the difference between PvP and griefing? Use your common sense. It's as good as that. I saw on Reddit, these false dichotomies of, well, if I can't grief, then there shouldn't be any PvP. And to be honest with you, that's bullshit. And I also saw one person say to me, hey, I played those old school games and all we ever did was run around the newbie zone and kill people. And I'm like, excuse me, I played those old school games and I didn't do that. So
Jo, to prostě nikdo jako nerobil, ty vole, takéto pičoviny nějaké tam, jako to robili přesně, vole, nějaký pár dementíčkou občas tam, ale jako normální člověk to nikdy jako what?
You shouldn't do that, and that's how you kill games. Yeah. So I have said many times in the past that
Nejhorší na to, že oni chcú, jakoby, ten intention, jakoby, takýchto ľudí, jakoby, in the end je zabit to, jakoby, to, no.
Our stance on griefing will always be it's an actionable offense. And to be fair, the players that I banned yesterday are players who I gave 3 separate warnings to stop griefing this brand new logged in player. That isn't preferential treatment. I don't care if it was Asmongold or Joe Schmo off the side of the street. If it's a new player trying to learn the game, you going and harassing and killing that person for no political motivation, for no opportunity cost, for no scarcity of resources, all the reasons why PvP should exist, you are doing it for opposite of that. You are doing it to harass a person off of the server. By all means, go find a different community. That is not our intent, and you are exploiting our system.
This is not for you.
Good. Hell yeah.
Nice.
No, I 100% agree
W.
with that. That's rad as hell, man. Yeah, so one of the things I always tell people is new players, you have to cultivate them up. You don't want to kill them really early. You need to bring them up so that you can have good fights with them later. Definitely fight them and take all their shit later. That's great. Fantastic. But let them get there first. They're not worth anything when they're level 1. Doesn't make any sense.
That's right.
Yeah, you want good fights. And it was the same thing at EVE. It was always the thing where, like, there was like a code of honor thing where if you blew someone up and it was like a new player, you'd usually be like, hey, man, here's a ship again. Get out there and go fight. Sorry about that. There's your first ship exploded. Here you go. It was a very common thing at EVE. EVE can be a cutthroat bastard of a game to people, but a lot of people would do that for new players because you knew if that guy sticks around, you might be able to fight him later in a big fleet battle.
Oh, yeah.
You might be able to fight him in small game PvP, you know.
MMOs live and die off population. Like the funny thing is, and the sheer irony of it is that the players who were getting their socks off to murdering Asmon or a new player, or who run around newbie zones, as a high level character killing people, like they're only causing themselves a disservice. They enjoy the PvP elements of the game, but by taking those actions, they are reducing the population. That's why, as a company, it's important to make sure those types of actions are bannable offenses. And, it is not the intended experience of the PvP mechanics.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I'm glad you're not pulling your punches on banning people. Like, straight up. I think that's one of the biggest missteps that I've seen inside of large-scale MMOs is the company goes, oh, we can't ban people because if we ban people, then we won't have people buying the video game. It's like, no, if you don't ban people for these actions, less people will feel good about the game.
But
and you will lose more players. It's one of the worst decisions that companies make. They want to conserve 5 players, and they lose hundreds as a result of it.
That's right, yeah.
Banhammer's most important aspect of the game, 100%. 100% agree with that. It's no tolerance for exploiting, no tolerance for griefing, like basic stuff, right? That, very, very important. So I'm glad that's off to the right start for me. Here's a kind of a miscellaneous one. What is the drop system intention behind drop chance? When you're like, why is it reduced when you're killing higher level enemies. Because we ran into a situation today. We went to the Tower of Carfen. We went all the way up the tower, and we stopped getting any loot at all once we got to enemies that were about 3 to 4 levels higher than us. And I mean at all. We killed dozens and dozens.
That's a bug. Unfortunately, we did do some changes to our experience curves, both the diminishing return on party size, because what we saw last weekend and the weekend prior was that there was nothing stopping players from just getting into a raid and having essentially a faster. Say again?
I meant gear, like drop items, not XP.
No, yeah. No.
Oh,
but
okay.
what we did was we tuned the experience curve to adjust the raid size so that we brought players back down to intended encounter design, which is group size for those areas. And instead, the tuning that we did for the XP curve all relates to a single system, which is our reward tables.
Oh,
and
no.
reward tables include drop chances for items as well as experience gained. So that's a bug that needs to get fixed this week, essentially.
Enjoy splitting those tables. That's gonna be rough.
No. We can just apply a modifier to the experience side of the table, but
that's good,
yeah,
it's really good. I'm glad that's an easy fix, because we went in there and we're like, I'm not getting anything anymore. We also ran into a really interesting one today too, where we got 5 players together and we killed a monster. Monster's level 20. We're all about level 19. We killed that monster. Everything was fine. We switched one of the players out for level 22, and it dropped our total amount of experience dramatically. Even though we still had 5 players, because they were 2 levels higher than the monster and 3 levels in disparity from us, I think it triggered the power leveling system, and we went from 7K on a kill to 4K on a kill. So I'm wondering what is the reasoning behind this? What are you guys trying to tune?
So the idea there is that when you add a higher level party member, 2 things happen. One, you're adding an additional divisible component, right? This is a new player, right? You're dividing it by 4 instead of 5.
Oh, we knew we did. We kept the group size the same between the 2.
Oh, okay. So the group size was the same.
Yeah.
So that's probably an overtuning on the distribution of the experience. So basically what happens is the experience comes in, it gets divided based off of player level, because player level is the best indicator of contribution towards killing of the monster. So the higher level should have gotten a slightly higher distribution of experience from that split up. That is intended, but whether or not it's tuned accurately is something we'll need to inspect.
Okay.
That players who are following aren't getting repeat kind of questions, but I enjoy getting back to some of the basics for your community, because obviously this is very new. The game is very new for your community.
Yeah.
So I'm digging deep in kind of old design territory, whereas normally within our core community, I'm answering very, very nuanced questions.
Very specific and on the fringe. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Chat wants to know, do you wear wigs?
Do I wear wigs?
Yeah.
Like hair wigs?
And if you don't wear wigs, when will you wear wigs? Have you worn wigs?
I have worn a wig. I was for Halloween. I wore a wig. I was Donald Trump. I put on a big giant wig.
That's outrageous. That's so funny.
It was outrageous. It was totally outrageous.
Oh no.
It was actually quite funny because the wig was terrible. And anytime I would talk, the hair would just flap up and down.
The chat's got this whole thing with me. If I win the Streamer Awards this year, I have to go on stage with a wig. So I'm looking forward to that.
I'm digging it.
We'll see.
What kind of wig are we talking?
I was thinking about a gigantic, like a big one of those big rainbow afros, like just go all out.
Oh yeah,
yes.
Ones,
Okay.
Awesome.
I'm gonna have to get like a massive wig. You
got to get one that goes to the floor.
Yeah, just a huge wig, dude.
You could do like a cousin it wig.
Dude, I could. All right, so chat has actually reported something interesting with regional distribution. They reported that Austria is not an available country to select when making an account. Is this intentional? And if so, is there any chance this can be changed?
There is definitely a chance that can be changed. It's probably not intentional. So I'll have to check with the web team on that.
Very cool. Awesome. Yeah, it came up a lot today 'cause we were like, why don't I exist?
That's unfortunate. We have an Austrian producer. He would be very sad to hear that.
Well, let him know he can't play the game anymore. Yeah.
Bohužel. Rakušania nechcú ty vole ešte.
So we know that there's going to be wipes. Are you guys planning on doing any wipes soon? Can you talk about the wiping
To ma
sort of,
zaujíma, no. Kedy sa
idea
do
that
toho
you have
tak
around the
joinuješ
game? Is this something you
do
want to do
toho
when you want people to go
testovania.
test the early game again, or when new areas come out? Like, is there a strategy to this you're willing to disclose?
Obviously we were trying not to wipe during phase one. I think we're going to be good on that front. We saw some database issues over this weekend that was probably affecting anywhere from 1% to 2% of users. So we didn't feel it was necessary to try to correct that at this stage, given the level of frequency. When it comes to wiping, our intent is for December 20th to be a full wipe day. The
20.
desire, obviously,
decembra.
to wipe is that we're making balance changes, content changes, we're introducing new things in the early leveling process based off of the data that we've collected, both from these last several weeks of player testing on the non-fresh start servers. We're getting a look at some of those changes on the fresh start servers. But come December 20th, we expect that we will have a significant amount of changes having been brought up from our dev branch and QA branches, which we will want to see tested. So that is the scheduled wipe date.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, no,
Okay.
I'm actually really happy about that because I think there's going to bring in so many new players. There's going to be so many new systems.
Jo,
And
akurát to bude na tie Vianoce, kde si všetci to budú môcť ako teoreticky tam otestovať, to bude teda chcieť akoby z tých alfa boys. My sme ale zatiaľ akoby prešli 52 minút, ono to má proste 2 hodiny.
that kind of an approach right then.
God, tam je
makes
moc
the most sense to me.
informácií, moja hlava
that's great.
praskne.
I'm actually looking forward to a wipe on this because I've gotten deep into mage and I want to play another class. And like, I don't want to change off the mage because I'm like, I could just get more stuff on the mage. I just hit level 20 today and I'm just like styling with gear, like absolutely going for that. It's been a lot of fun. So something that's kind of interesting for me is what is your guys' intention for kind of looting for characters? Because one of the things we've run into a problem of is you generally think of a mage as wearing light armor. You generally think of, say, a ranger wearing medium armor. You think of a tank as wearing heavy armor or a fighter wearing heavy armor. But we noticed that a lot of the statistics on this gear doesn't quite line up. Like I ended up wearing gear that visually makes me look like kind of a cleric, but it's also very good for mages. But one of the set bonus pieces, set tier 7, actually gave me healing power, which is useless for me, but the rest of it is very good for a mage. So where's the kind of intention here? Am I supposed to wear 5 pieces of light and 3 pieces of medium to get like kind of multi-track drifting on that?
I mean, that's part of kind of the more horizontal player agency choice, right? Obviously, we have this, Holy Trinity design of our archetypes and our classes, but part of what makes it possible for you to hybridize or flirt with those role lines, but also not just flirt with them, but react to the encounter design that you're facing, is a bit of agency over the types of gear that you're wearing. Now, right now, the artisanship system, even though there's a lot to it currently, is still very much in its infancy. There's a lot of placeholder stuff. There's a lot of placeholder interactions. We're going to be tuning that as we continue forward and introduce additional systems. But really, the drop scenarios that you're talking about are kind of hit or miss on what your intent is. And the economy through artisanship is really intended to provide that more granular choice making for the player. But the intent essentially behind what type of gear you should have is entirely dependent on the type of challenge rating you're going up against. In a PvP scenario, it's a little bit more difficult to obviously control the types of damages that you're going to take or the offensive needs and capabilities that you have. So it's important on a gear grind front that you have potentially multiple options at your disposal depending on...
Jo, že proste budeš chodiť, ja neviem, v heavy sete na PvPčka, v light sete, farmiť, alebo niečo
the
podobné.
encounter and the PvP that you're going into. From a PvE perspective, part of Ashes of Creation's unique design is a very dynamic world where these spawners for monsters and dungeons can change depending on what types of story arc decisions are made, what type of narrative structures get embraced, and which types of nodes advance to what levels and under what cultural influence. So everything is kind of tied together to be changing throughout your experience, and going into a PvE encounter or situation, you should have some cognizance over the type of incoming damage you'll be taking, which set type mitigates that best, your skill composition and choices that you've made, and what elements of the gear bonuses you want to emphasize.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things I was looking at is I can get 5 pieces of light with as much int as possible because I'm a mage, right? And then get 3 pieces of medium, and the 3-piece set for medium is actually bonus crit chance for baseline crits. So now I'm just, stacking damage on the other side, and I get a little bit more defensive out of it. So I'm glad that that's kind of the intention, because we were trying to figure it out. We're like, this whole set bonus looks cool together, but now what? I think the other thing too is visually, my character now looks like a magical hobo, right? Which is generally a thing that ends up happening. Is there any plans for like transmogging outside of cosmetics? Can I change my character to look the way that I want to? I think the baseline for this is World of Warcraft does this phenomenally. Any item that you pick up, you get the skin for that item, and you can go and mix and match and make yourself look beautiful. What are your plans around transmogrification for the character?
Yeah, we have a very extensive GDD on transmogging and the ability to customize your visual appearance of sets, and in order to still maintain the player threat assessment capabilities, we intend to provide a buff that lives on a targeting plate should you be targeted by an opponent, that indicates to them kind of gear type composition, but not necessarily what gear specifically.
Jo, takže jakoby stále budeš moc, jakoby nebude to, že hoci kdo si dá transmog prostě a bude vyzerať jako super tanky, vole, beefy boy, ale pritom to bude, vole, light mage někde vzadu, ale bude tam prostě ikonka, která ti dodá, že tento týpek nosí, vole, light, vole, lomeno, medium, something. Oh, okay.
It is. So we do want to have a very healthy and interactive transmog system. I think WoW does a great job with that. We will have something similarly robust.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised by the number of people in chat that don't like this, which is very interesting. I think that one of the problems that I see in PvP many of the times is when you have a transmog system, you don't know what kind of armor the person is wearing when you have so many armor classifications. No. But if they have a system in place where it's going to show if you're wearing light, medium, or heavy when you click on that person, when you have them targeted, I think that makes the most sense. Like, transmog is really cool because, to be honest with you, I like having transmog sets where I can just go show it off, or we can do tournaments and things where you're like, hey, everybody's going to go do this. You're not a fan, to be honest? That makes sense. I'm interested where the drawdown is, though. Yeah, someone's saying transmog bad, but why?
I think that players tend to look at transmog as an additional layer of obfuscation for you as a player in PvP to understand who and what you're going up against. And that is why, from a design perspective, I've included this concept of essentially gear composition buff that players, when selecting a target, can see they're wearing 3 pieces of light and 5 pieces of heavy. That gives you an indicator of at least their kind of damage mitigation stat against what types of incoming damage power. So I think that to a degree kind of counters the concern around transmog, but still allows for players to leverage that cosmetic kind of flair and customization option, which is what obviously transmog is intending to deliver on.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, and I think that's kind of the main thing. Is I usually see people being very upset about that being in PvP, and if you guys have a mitigation strategy for that, it makes a ton of sense. And
there is an additional mitigation, by the way. We also have a basic appearance mode that we're intending to deliver on for high player count battles. So when you enter into a siege environment, when you enter into a PvP event, you are then able to utilize the default player appearance perspective, which removes cosmetics and removes specific gear visuals, and instead gives a basic appearance for each armor type, whether it be cloth, plate, or leather. This obviously cuts down on the rendering performance issues that can occur in high density battles. That we want to allow for, and allows players to have that perspective.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really, really good, actually. So something that came up in chat that's actually PvP related is kind of interesting. We saw the same kind of behavior in EVE. It's very common. You have one group come in, PvP a guy, and another guy come in and steal the loot because that guy is not flagged for PvP. He doesn't get attacked by Concord, which is like the space police, right? So you can kill people in protected areas with the one PvP group, and then the one guy steals everything. Is there any intention at all or planning to stop someone from doing that in this? Because right now you can do that. You can have that guy go and loot everything. He doesn't get flagged for PvP, and he can make out scot-free, and you get corruption for attacking him, even though he technically engaged.
There is a whole suite of features that are still outstanding when it comes to player loot piles and the bag system. First and foremost, when we talk about different types of bags that you can take, these are bags that relate to your material inventory. Obviously, as we know, having played the game, the intent behind player looting is that you drop a portion of your materials, not completed items, unless, of course, you're corrupt, and then players can loot those materials. There is intended to be bag progression and bag arcs that have different types of stats associated with them. One of those stats is interaction stat, which determines the amount of time it takes to open a bag on a loot pile that was a player. So you can dial up a certain type of bag and equipment that requires much longer time to interact with. In addition, we have the concept of introducing flagging as a part of looting a body that is not a member of your raid, party, or guild. And if you do loot that body successfully after the required time, you will be flagged and then can become.
Ale zase na druhou stranu, jakoby, aj keď bude flagnutý a potom umrie, tak už to aj tak jakoby vylútil
a valid target in PvP. So again, it's just important to note, and I know that we do ourselves to a degree a disservice as a game that visually looks like it has some polish to it and that it has some pretty competent and core gameplay loops that are interactable with during alpha, but we are still very much in alpha and in phase 1. So a lot of these systems and features that are intended are still not yet online. And obviously that's the benefit of doing these types of Q&As.
Oh, definitely. No, I'm interested in seeing how the bag thing works out, because right now I feel the bags are in kind of a weird spot, but it's early alpha. Like, that stuff gets changed out later. You get balanced stuff and everything like that. So I was like, well, that's weird. I'm going to wait on that, right? But I do find it very compelling to flag someone for PvP when they loot something, even if it's 30 seconds a minute, because then you got to be like, I don't know if maybe they're not, you know. Right. And that adds a little bit of risk to it, and you got to think about it. You're like, do I want to steal that from that dude? And it also lets me set up traps.
Right, know? Exactly. Yeah. And to be clear, I know some people I saw were asking, do you still have to spend that time to interact with your own loot pile? And the answer is no. You would evade any of that time constraint in interacting with your own loot pile.
I like that. Yeah, I really like that. That was one of the things that's really weird is when you go to interact with your loot pile, you do the whole animation, you stand up, and then you get the UI. And I was like, God, I just want to pick up my stuff. Like, it's my stuff, you know, like, yes. Oh, is there anything that you guys have planned to show you which loot pile is yours? That led to a lot of confusion among players where I was like, what? And then I loot it, and it shows that none of them are stolen. Then I take it, and I'm like, it's all stolen now.
Yeah, probably the two biggest things that are very much work in progress in the game is our UI and obviously the art when it comes to, you know, destroying certain destruction and polish around the environments. But UI is very much one of those things. We do intend to have a specific call out for your own loot pile so that it's easily recognizable. As well as a mini-map indicator of the location of your loot pile as well for you.
Okay, perfect. One of the ones that gets talked about a lot, I'm guaranteeing that they're going to do something for this, is font size. Font size is not scalable right now. Even I'm like, what the hell does that say? Right? Because like it's in the bottom left, it's a little tiny thing, you know?
I just had a conversation with our UI team about that this last week. Obviously, you know, you can press the / button to kind of scale individual HUD elements, but of course that also scales the graphical component as well. There is an intent to provide the feature to scale the font in the future. When that comes online is probably not going to be until, I would say, phase 3. But for now, I just had a sweeping change. I'm not sure if it's in this build or if it's down in our QA branch and will come up next week. But it will just overall increase font size across the board.
Nice. And they're talking about it for cursor size as well, because that's a big accessibility thing. One of the things I brought up pretty early on was you guys have, and this is wild to see this in an alpha, fully modifiable UI. Everything is movable. That's huge. And also, and I haven't really seen this before, recolorable everything, man.
Yeah.
Like being able to recolor different classes and things like that. And a lot of people don't realize how big of a deal this is for people with different types of color blindness. Is usually you set up like Deuteranope and like all these different types of color blindness settings, and they're locked into those. But giving them the ability to change colors across anything and all of those colors they can set themselves means that there's no having to fit into one of those, which is awesome.
I'm a big proponent of that, myself being personally...
Pozeráme momentálne dvojhodinový rozhovor s game directorom Stevenom z Ashes of Creation a jeho jako víziu celou a takúto jakoby veci a už to tu pozeráme hodinu 5. Jdeme ďalej, ja už chcem observovať celé.
It is an important aspect of accessibility, I think, that a lot of gamers, have to struggle with from a options perspective.
Mám tu chat niekoho farboslepého. On tu jakoby nejakých farboslepých jakoby gamers. Neviem, že napríklad môj tatino jakoby bol proste, že jo. Ale ja by som nemal mať úplne žiadnej.
That was a high priority to begin with, obviously. But as I said, there's a lot of stuff still to get done on the UI side.
It's funny, our artist is red-green colorblind as well. Same exact thing. And we built all the color accessibility into our games that way, where like it's just built into the game. They're like, where's the options? It was like, it's already built in. Every environment is structured to make that work. Yeah. Make poison purple, you can just change it. Oh, you're talking about poison on ground. That's actually a good point. We were fighting in a lot of grassy areas, and because the poison on the ground is green and the grass is green, the only way I knew I was standing in it was because I have a big red X on my back going, you can't be healed.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of stuff to do still on the VFX side as well. We have a great VFX team, but certain features, whether it be like, some highlights or Fresnels or, different components that just kind of help make the visuals pop without contributing to kind of the visual soup and noise that can occur sometimes in large battles. That's something that is, I think, a level of polish that comes a bit later. After we get through, obviously the initial implementation of all the abilities for the NPCs and the player characters.
Okay, so here's going to be kind of a hard-hitting one. There's a lot of people, and I've talked about this quite a bit, with the alpha access cost. It's $120. And a lot of people are really upset about that. The way that I've explained it to them is it's not just access to the alpha. It's about a year, maybe a year and a half or more of content for all of alpha, phase 1, 2, and 3, beta 1 and 2, a month of game time when it comes out. How do you feel about this? Because I know that wasn't the original offering and you guys changed it. So can you tell me a little bit about that process, the feedback that you received, how you felt, and why it changed?
Yeah, for sure. How do we arrive at what that cost is? Part of it is, as you described, allowing for an environment that is capable of holding, over 100,000 concurrent players is a far different cost profile than having an environment that is only holding, 20 or 30,000. And then especially when you compound that with the length of time that we expect Alpha 2 to run, which is, at least a year's worth of time, this is something that we want to accommodate the players who are willing and able and want to provide the testing side of this and the feedback to join us in that process. But we also need to be cognizant of the cost because, we don't have a publisher. We don't have a board of investors that are, contributing to the development of the project. This is a personal endeavor of my own. So, in order to kind of make sure that we are providing players an opportunity to participate in that, we came to the cost analysis of what it takes to achieve the levels of players that we're going to potentially see from an interest perspective. So when we initially announced that, obviously we saw the pushback that we got from the broader community, which, obviously I'm very much in tune and watching what players' sentiment and feedback is. So that's when I decided to go back and say, essentially that it includes all of the betas. And it was always intending really to include the betas. It was
Ty si už zmeškal všetko najpodstatnejšie vec, ty vole, to je strašné s tebou tu pozerať niečo.
Just going to be on a separate PTR realm, so it was still going to have the same content, but I wanted to preserve the beta players being on their own servers rather than allowing the Alpha 2 participants to kind of switch over to the beta servers as well. But we articulated that a little bit better, that it includes beta 1 and beta 2 as well. And I included a month of game time and some cosmetic currency.
Já osobně jakoby fakt jako premýšlám nad tím, že co se týká jakoby, že ono jako jo, uvědomil, že to není úplně worth it tam dávat prostě $120 za samozřejmě alfu, který jakoby whatever, bude v tom sice jako tam potom jeden měsíc game timeu, který je normálně v ceně vole 15 a nějaké jako věci. Ale to, že by som jako mohl viac menej najbližší tu jako presne rok alebo rok a pol si občas jakoby tam testovat nějaké věci a nahrávat jakoby content okolo Ashes, je celku vec, na ktorou jako rozmýšľam teraz celku, aj keď teraz momentálne sú to vždycky iba tie hracie víkendy, neskôr to majú byť hracie akoby celé týždne a tak podobne. A aj keď je to fucking $120 a je to presne kvôli tomu, že oni tam jako nemohli pustiť 400 miliard ľudí jakoby rovno, aby to tam zhorelo všetko. A jo, zatiaľ to prostě ovec, to je normálne jedno fucking W za druhým, prostě to je absolútne I'm hooked.
That I felt, would better be received by the player base. But ultimately, it does come down to, what does it cost to service our DevOps and LiveOps teams and all the server capacity, the CDN costs that come with downloading a, 100 gigabyte game eventually, like all of that stuff incurs cost. I have to account for that as a responsible management of the project's purview.
Yeah, no, I'm actually really happy with it because I think one of the things is when it did come out and it was like only alpha, I agreed. I was like, yeah, that doesn't seem like really good value. And immediately you guys turned around, you added beta, you added a month of game time, you had the $15 of currency. And I was like, you know what? That makes sense now. And now it's down to that. It moved away from, I don't know about that, to now it's a subjective experience. Is this good value for me? Do I feel invested enough in this game?
Jo, a já takisto jakoby prostě tím, že tu jako chcem jednak si tu jako pozerať ty videa, takéto podobné veci, tak oveľa lepšie sa aj mne bude viac menej to vám nejak akoby niečo tvoriť okolo toho, alebo oveľa viac akoby ľudí do toho, keď tak ako bude vidieť, keď to reálne akoby bude môcť aj vyskúšať a tak podobne, no. Už nikdy simple, už nikdy sa tu nebude hrať Dota. Lebo pozerám video.
And I always tell people this: if you don't feel like it's good value, don't buy it. Right? That's how that always has to go. You should
Pozerám jedno dvojhodinové video, to znamená automaticky, že už nikdy sa k Dote nedostanem. Nie, že by som ju akoby, nie, že by som dneska akoby jednu jako neodohral, akoby jo, na tomto streame priamo, ale ja už nikdy ju nechcem vidieť.
Be buying something that
I'm only Ashes of Creation streamer, aj keď to neexistuje ešte rok a pol.
Feel is good for you, makes sense for you, and you're not being pressured into getting it, right? That's how that...
Když teď dá subscribe aspoň 1000 lidí, tak těch $120 nabereme. Já myslím, že by stačilo jakoby jo, dost méně, jakoby jo, ale jako jo.
Should always go.
And I think there is a clear distinction also with how we approach the Alpha 2 access. I'm not spending money on...
Ovec, počkej, ovec, ty dobre bejtíš, ale nebejtíš správne, protože teraz momentálne je to v tej Alpha 1, kde sa to dá kúpiť insta, ale otvorené na hranie je to len cez víkendy zatiaľ. Jo, takže to není insta teraz, ale je to vždycky na víkend. Potom to má být jako neskôr, myslím, na konci roka, alebo kedy to má být už na, jakože to má být zase 5 dní, jakoby cez týždeň a nie víkend, jo. Proč jim to říkáš? Nebo, tak ale musí být transparentný, ne? A tak nikdo nič neposiela.
Advertising, I'm not spending money.
A tak si to bude muset koupit sám, prostě tu.
On marketing, I'm not... taking content creators or streamers and paying them to play the game and get the vision of the game out. That's not the intended phase right now. We're not in a marketing phase. So this is really something that players who want to, or testers who want to come and be a part of that process, they have an option to do so. And those who don't, I've released the visual NDA. You can watch others play it and you can still provide feedback in what you're seeing. That's, in my mind, that's kind of the best of both worlds. It also ensures that there is some level of responsibility because the testers who are participating have made an investment essentially into that access, having that access. And so there, hopefully the bar of responsibility gets raised when that is the barrier of entry, that they're going to be willing to put up with the bugs and the crashes, and they're going to give their honest opinion and put in bug reports and do what's necessary in order to service the game during this phase.
Ale popravdě cez víkend by som to jako kludně vyskúšal, jakoby, jo, jako ne, že ne. Ale to podľa mňa aj tak si myslím, že zrovna Dota komunita, neviem, či bude úplne nadšená, že by som tam chcel skúšať jakoby hoci jakú inú hru, na ktorú by ešte mali posielať peniaze. Jo, rozumiem, to je také jakoby, no.
Now, that is also an element of this, but I agree with you. Anybody who doesn't want to participate in purchasing alpha access, you shouldn't do that. Like, it is not a requirement. I tell people actively, do not purchase alpha if you're looking to play a game. This is not yet a game. You might find fun here and there, and that's great. It gives us good feedback on the core loops, but we're nowhere near finished on fully feature development, on content in the game. Like, this is literally a testing environment.
Jo, tak ale to je o to, že keď jako investuješ do tej alfy, jakoby, tak investuješ do toho, že ja môžem z toho jakoby robiť content a testovať tie veci a skúšať si to a mať nejaký jakoby prehľad o tom, ako sa to bude vyvíjať a mať z toho nejaký jakoby svoj feel. To je ten investment jakoby do toho za mňa. A keď ako proste nechceš, tak to ako nemusíš a potom reálne tá hra nebude mať ani box cost, ako hovoril, nebude to stáť nič tá hra, bude stáť akoby, bude tam mesačný subscription, proste $15 alebo koľko. A bude si to akoby potom moci vyskúšať, nebude to stáť vole $80 alebo niečo tá hra, takže ako teraz dobre, že tu ako na najbližší rok a pol si ako vytvorím občasný content a aj veci, ktoré môžem akoby pokryť, ktoré mňa zaujímajú akoby o tej budúcnosti Ashes a takisto to akoby môže tým pádom, že by som akoby robil nejaké videá, veci a content a hral, čo je Ashes, tak takisto aj od Ashes môžu prísť, ja neviem, nejaké, si vymyslím teda, že by tam boli potom akoby nejaké dropy, ktoré by boli iba na nejakých kanáloch, ktorí by boli partnermi, čo ja viem, Intrepidu, ako content creators a takto ďalej a môžeme mať akoby prepojenia, môžeme mať nejaké, možno nejaké, ja neviem, tu rozdávať veci akoby od Intrepidu alebo robiť tu nejaké záležitosti, takže ono to ako premýšľam nad tým celku dosť, no, ale ako $120 je ale celku dosť. A nie je to zas tak,
for MMORPGs specifically have had a fictitious taste in their mouth of what the term alpha means.
Yep.
Because a lot of the alphas that you experience as a player are really just port overs from Eastern publishers into North American and European regions that are fully completed, fully fleshed out games, and they call it an alpha in order as a marketing gimmick to get higher box prices for players to come and play the game during that phase. It's kind of like an early access gimmick. And that has done a disservice to really what alphas are, which is more represented by the phase we're in.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I've been telling our players that the whole time, man. Everybody in the community, I'm like, this is what a real alpha is. And they're like, oh, it's all broken. I was like, yes. It's kind of the whole point, right? Is you break it right now so that when the game is finished, it's in a good spot. But people have been kind of poisoned against what the word alpha means and what the word beta means because you get all these games come out and it's like, oh, we're in alpha.
Kreatore, mňa nedostaneš na klasik proste, ani keby, ja už som si ho zažil kedysi, ja nie som úplne človek, ktorý by tým klasikom bol nejaký ohúrený. Videl som teraz tam predstavený Mist of Pandaria klasik a normálne som hey, please, niekto hráci, I don't give a single shit. Som rád, že sa tam ako pohrali inak s Warcraftom a tými, urobili tam aj ten remake tej dvojky a jednotky a tak. To je akoby fajn, ale inak akože tieto klasik veci všetky, I don't give a single shit, ako reálne.
For how long? 5 days. It's like, what the hell is that? That's not an alpha.
What are you gonna do in 5 days?
A to je skôr, akoby musíš akoby počítať, hlavne to nie je $130, je to $120. To je trošku ako dosť rozdiel, ale ide o to, že je to skôr investment mňa do nejakého horizontu, povedzme ďalšieho minimálne roka, kde z toho akoby proste môže niečo akoby byť ako content a tak ďalej a bez toho to môžem akoby pozerať samozrejme na videách a dávať feedback a tak, ale není to ako keby som si to mohol ako ošahať, že ono.
Nothing. We're gonna do one bug fix. It'll be a month later. That's ridiculous,
Right.
dude. Yeah,
Aby som to mohol, no jasné, že to není pre nikoho, pre bežného usera, ktorý by si chcel zahrať hru. Ja ty si nekupuješ alfu na to, aby si išiel hrať hru. Ty rozumieš, ty to chceš testovať, ty chceš byť akoby v tom vývoji, ty chceš akoby tam nahlasovať píčoviny, čo sa ti stanú. Jo, proste, a takéto veci, akoby, jo. A tvoriť okolo toho niečo, alebo akoby v tom byť, alebo to testovať. Ty si nekupuješ kurva hru proste. Ale nemohlo to stať. Peli, ty vôbec si nepočúval zase, ty zase rozumieš, vole, piču anglicky určite, ale piču si mu zase rozumel. Tu vysvetloval, kurva, že to nemôže byť za vole $20 alebo zadarmo, že chápeš, že by tam vole nabehlo 400 miliárd ľudí do píči, by im zhoreli ty vole tie budovy serverov do píči. Jebe ti, tak samozrejme, že tam potrebujú iba nejaký sample size kvalitných ľudí, ktorých oddelíš, keď tam dáš väčší, akoby ten proste, akoby price za to a dáš im tam akoby nejaké tie veci.
Yeah.
It is totally crazy.
It's absolutely insane to me. Yeah, no, it's good to see that for me. It's honestly good to see that. Oh yeah, here's something kind of interesting. Because we don't have quests right
Tam je ale iný rozdiel, starec. Že Star Citizen ma nezaujíma ani 0,001% akoby mojej podstaty. A Sheets of Creation ma zaujíma, víš co, takže...
and we only have grinding in the open world. How do you feel about time invested per level gained by the player? Because the way that I felt...
Peli, ty si tam riešiteľ problémov. Oni by vydelali peníze a měli by na lepší servery. Kurva, choď robiť do korporátu, jebe ti na gebulu!
about it so far is it is quite
Píčo,
long,
to je presne
and it's
úplne
not
ten
for
toxický,
everyone.
úplne,
But I
tak zarobíme peniaze, dáme im to za vole 5 kilo. Haha, jo, to je ono, nahrabeme tam. Shut the fuck
do
up.
feel very positively when I gain that level. But I can't
Vieš
understand.
anglicky dobre, ale nepočúvaš to akoby vôbec.
And from the other perspective, of, like
Klasika.
somebody doesn't have a huge amount of time, what does that feel like for them? And like, dude, I've got a lot of time to play a video game. And
That's a super fair assessment of the current leveling experience.
Yep.
Probably our most completed core loop is the combat experience, engaging with the archetype, the fighting with monsters and encounters. Like that is I believe right now our most compelling, indicative, full feature focus of a gameplay loop. So what we're missing during phase one, and we fully knew this, and we tried to express this outwardly, are those narrative components, are the artisanship progression paths, and they are the social organizations and the religions, like all of these separate progression paths that give you adventuring experience when you do them as well, but also have the power to influence the world in ways equal to, or in some cases greater than what adventuring leveling does. So right now it feels a bit a bit overtuned towards like monster grinding because that content isn't yet in the game, and that's what phase 2 and phase 3 are going to represent. So I would agree with you. Right now it feels a bit heavy-handed, and
Jo, Peli, ale môžem za to robiť content, môžem to streamovať, môžem z toho robiť videá. Takže overall si myslíš, že akoby za ten rok a pol, kým to akoby bude, sa mi nevráti akoby ten investment tých, opakujem, $120, nie 130 €. Neviem, prečo furt hovoríš 130 €, kde to je úplne ako niečo iné ako $120, ale...
we could make some
Odkiaľ to
simple curve adjustments to faster level players in order to experience something different.
Starec, tvoja mamka bola ľahko ovplyvniteľná, keď som ju včera šukal do prdele! Zavri hubu!
And to be honest with you, we do that on our PTR right now, which is just accessible by Alpha 1 participants. So, in our PTR, when we do testing during the week, we test every day. And we have, several hundred Alpha 1 participants, usually concurrently on a single server, helping us to test in PTR. We will toggle max level, give everybody max level, and we will give them gear and gold, and we will say, go test these things. Here's our hit list of fixes that we put in this build. Please make sure you hammer these hard. Like that's the intent there. But it is not something we want to bring over into the Alpha 2 testing environment, because this is really intended to be more of a soak than what those highly targeted PTR tests are. And so we want players to spend additional longer time moving through the leveling process so that we have an opportunity to collect more granular data and to address
To
bugs
není
that might
všetko
be
akoby
hard to
final,
find from
samozrejme.
our internal QA teams.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I'm super happy with that, man. Like I like the leveling experience right now, but I can understand it be too grindy for a lot of people. I play grindy games. And
Jo, ja toto ale napríklad presne milujem. Akože ja som osobne človek, čo to bude akoby podľa mňa proti 90% z vás, si myslím, chat, tuto nado mnou, a môžete mi dať na to názor, ale ja som absolútny hejter takého toho questového štýlu levelovania v každom modernom MMO od časov akoby Vovka. Ja som vždycky neznášal to, že si idem zobrať tuto od jedného kokota, vole, výkričník pojebaný, iba zabiť, vole, 5 pojebaných, vole, hadov a 4-krát vymrdať starcovú mamku a hneď akoby potom to sa musím ísť odozdať tomu týpkovi, že hej, kámo, ja som ti konečne už 4-krát tú mamku vymrdal, môžeš mi tu dať 80-krát viac experience, ako som mal akoby za to zabíjanie mobov. Ne, ja radšej budem grindiť do píči tie moby, no celý deň budem zabíjať jedných pojebaných goblinov, vole, level 7, aby som tam na level 9, povedzme, a si poviem, dobre, už sú to na mňa málo, idem farmiť túto pojebaných pavúkov a mrdať ich do gebule, no ďalších 6 hodín pre mňa za mňa a vygrindím si tam akoby ďalšie levely alebo niečo podobné. Ja to budem robiť radšej, ako behať z skurveného bodu A do bodu B a to som ti našiel, vole, 5 kaktusov. Tu máš, ty vole, týpku. To neznášam, ty vole, absolútne. Druhá vec je presne, že akoby, pozor, musíte rozdeliť, akoby ja berem teraz čisto ten levelovací grind proces. To, že už od toho je oddelené akoby niečo, čo myslím napríklad ako story, jo? Že proste tam môže byť engaging story, ktoré tam akoby bude, ale ja nemám rád, keď je to proste mandatory, akoby vec, že musíš akoby to prejsť a takto podobné. Ja mám rád, keď kľudne si to vylevlím celé a potom sú tam veci, ktoré si akoby prejdem a zistím a vole, zistím story, vole, veci a tak, ale neznášam, keď musím, vole, chodiť furt dokola, je to len questenie, dokola. Berem 3 questy, odozdám 3 questy, idem tam, vole, tu berem 4 questy, tu berem 5 questov, zoberiem 4 questy, tu berem 3 questy, tu zoberiem 2 questy, tu splním 2 questy, tu odozdám kokotovi pičovinu. Ja to absolútne, ale absolútne, ako som hejter tohoto systému. Bohužiaľ. Dobrá otázka, Dominiku. Dup.
so this kind of a thing is totally fine with me. Having alternate routes for that just makes sense. You know, like any type of questing systems or things like that where people can come in and actually get some kind of progression. Because I feel like a game like this would be great with that core audience, but it will hemorrhage the more casual player if there's no other options, you know. So I'm glad. Yeah, I'm really glad.
And that is definitely why those alternate progression paths, you know, again, have equal to potentially higher relevance in impacting the game, is because they also have varying levels of time investment required to progress there. But I will say, you know, not to conflate the issue, we will be on the grindier side of what probably most modern MMO players are accustomed to. And that is a bit of a callback.
Lepeli zrovna, čo sa týka Daisy, keby to vydali pred 10 rokmi, to, v akom je to teraz v stave, tak by to bolo podľa mňa OK a aj tak by to nebolo nič extrémne inovatívne. To, že ako by to teraz začína fungovať, to ja napríklad, ja absolútne mám, ako, to ide úplne mimo mňa, akože totál, ako jasne. Odtiaľ pochádza akoby veľa ľudí, akoby proste, čo potom ako prešiel na PUBG, že a takto ďalej a vznikol tam akoby tam celý ten, proste povedzme, akože žáner trošku v tom, ale ja som nikdy hlavne ani nebol zase taký ako fan nejakých takých tých ako úplne survival, furt, ja neviem, no.
To a more old school approach, of which you will find many callbacks in, you know, the design for Ashes.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy about that, man, because like there's something that I think is missing from the modern MMO. When I go play World of Warcraft retail, I don't feel like leveling is part of the game. I feel like it's an obstacle to get to the game.
Áno, presne to je ono. Proste levelovanie je čisto iba proste treba to nalevliť. That's it. Proste nič podstatné.
And when I play this, I feel like leveling the journey for that has felt like it is part of the game, which is something I didn't realize how much I missed, man. And like
Yeah,
that's
that
one of the
is good.
reasons I've just been so into it because of that.
Já jsem prostě například tiež jako grind person v tomto a ja fakt jako budem radšej grindiť 1000 mobov v jednej oblasti, ako splním, vole, 50 questov, vole, chodením tam a naspäť, jo.
That is an astute observation and very true, right? Like modern day MMOs, I mean, why do MMOs do that today? Obviously, the most important aspect of an MMORPG is the social component, right? There's a reason why it's massively multiplayer, and that's because the elasticity that comes with a social atmosphere is what you want to induct the player to as quickly as possible from a new user experience, right? Because then your chances of keeping that player are much higher. And oftentimes in the legacy MMOs that you're talking about, where it feels like leveling is just an obstacle, it's because that leveling process is devoid of players. There are no new players really in those starting zones, in those starting processes. They want to graduate you as quickly as possible to endgame where the rest of the player population is so that they induct you into the social elasticity. However, one of the strengths of Ashes of Creation's design is that our social environment exists around nodes, and the world around the nodes dynamically adjust not 100% of the spawners, but around 50 to 60% of the spawners to reflect differing levels of engagement. So even as a new player coming into a brand new zone, I'm not thrown into the wastelands of the new player experience. Instead, it's more likely that nodes, if I'm joining 6 months down the road, the nodes closest to the starting experience are the most booming, and there are environments around me where I get to see higher level players doing things while I am taking my path of the either curated or static, level progression design throughout that process, and I can meet people and I can be a part of these pseudo factions.
Ja práve, Peli, áno. Proste normálne, keby som si mal vybrať, či mám len proste hrať hru, engageovať v tom kombate, kombiť spely a zabíjať veci a tým mám only leveliť, tak si to vyberiem vždy. Miesto vole nejakého questenia a takýchto akoby píčovín okolo. Vždycky by som si vybral ten grind. Protože prostě hráš tu hru. Jo, prostě ty píči, prostě ta moderná doba, prostě ty to vole questovanie, prostě ty viac tu hru nehráš, ako ju hráš do píči prostě.
Even if my level disparity is great. That is part of the benefit that Ashes of Creation.
Jo, hráš tu hru, 3/4 času iba beháš, vole, hore, dole do píči, alebo sa ideš spýtať, vole, Frantu, aby ti povedal, že chce zabiť 20 prasat, proste, ktorých zostaneš 5 expov a potom on ti dá, vole, 400, lebo proste on ti povedal, že chce zabiť prasata. I don't give a fuck, jak chcem zabiť, vole, tých 20 prasiat a dostať za to tie expy a negivovať fakt na Frantu, vole. Franta mi potom môže dať do píči vohos, ty píčo, ktorý, vole, mi dá nejakú, vole, bonusovú záležitosť, niečo, keď chcem, ale nemá to byť mandatory na to, aby som expil. To je tá jedna vec, s ktorým mám proste problém.
Dynamic and node-driven world provide us that a lot of legacy modern-day MMOs do not have the advantage of.
So, with that in mind, one of the
To není to isté, ako to už som sa dozvedel, že lore a questenie, to nemusí byť spojené, aby si musel robiť len questing proste a veci. Rozumieš, toto myslím? Aby si nemusel robiť čisto, že hej, musíš robiť quest a takto akoby levelíš. Ne, ja si kľudne budem robiť akoby tie lore veci a neviem, nejaké príbehové záležitosti a pozriem si to akoby kedy ja chcem a ako chcem, ale nechcem na tom mať úplne závisle, že hej, do píči, ja si môžem akoby toto pozrieť, vole, musím tuto ísť robiť, ako tento quest, ten mi dá, vole, 45 krát viac a moby absolútne netreba ani zabíjať, proste ani netreba chodiť po svete. Presne to je na tom PvPčkovom akoby založenom MMOčku to najkrajšie, že ty akoby tam ide o to grindiť tie moby a grindiť akoby tie veci tam in open world. A tam práve vzniká aj to PvPčko a proste mlátenie o tie zóny a o nejaké proste farmenie týchto vecí. A o tom to celom je a nie úplne nazdar Franto, díky za quest.
Things that I really liked about Eve that was quite cool is any player can enter the world. They can become a part of the economy immediately because there was kind of a base set of materials that you can get from any mining, right? So you can get titanium, you can get pyrite, you can get these basic materials, and they are used in every craft in the entire video game. And that allowed any player to engage in the system. Does the crafting right now fit that? What is the goal that you guys have for crafting to not leave the new player out of that process?
Absolutely. The entire crafting system is built from the ground up. A lot of times you'll find crafting systems that are the inverse, where the goal is to reach the top and then everything is driven by the top down. That is not how, I have wanted our crafting system to kind of exist. And the reason for that is in some of the games that I played in the past, having that kind of strong foundation where everyone can have access to contributing to the...
No jasne, ja vravím, tam jakoby, prostě jak Matě stále debatuje ještě jakoby odhledom něčeho jiného, jakoby se tu preberá sice, ale o tom questení a tomto, já nevravím, že jakoby hejtím questy sami o sebe a lore a všetko toto, já prostě neznášam, keď to je točené iba okolo toho a musíš to jakoby robiť a nedá sa to jakoby grindiť bez toho. To je jakoby tá vec, čo je na píču. Ale presne ako píšeš, Peli, ešte tam, že ako máš tam samozrejme, že vec akože ty vole, choď pozrieť tento vole dungeon alebo tuto niečo a vole zabiť tam vole toho hlavného týpka alebo dones mi vole jeho hlavu a dobrý a za to dostaneš potom nejaký vole mega jako gear alebo niečo, OK. Ale nemá to byť tak, ja celé hovorím o tom, aby to nemalo byť tak, že tam za ten quest dostaneš 400 000 expov a celú tú vec akoby máš iba za ten revar toho questu, ale pritom akoby to, že tam si tam, že tam grindíš tie moby, to ti má dať už celú tú vec a potom dostaneš nejakú ten gear, nejaký special shit, something, proste a nejaké akoby XP ešte navíc akoby super, ale proste nemá to byť to hlavné.
Base layer of
môj
the
názor na to.
That the rest of the artisanship levels are then predicated upon, you constantly have an importance and or a demand from the economy to continue to receive those resources. Just to be clear, like, as I said, the economy is built foundationally from the bottom up. And, the important thing about the economy to keep in mind, which is probably difficult to experience right now because not a lot of the systems are online yet, but the infancy of them are, it's that resources as they kind of spawn throughout the world,
ale budem to počúvať so sluchatkami, takže dobrý.
Obviously instigates players to move resources so that they can sell them relevant to the crafting locations and workbenches that are available in nodes, and we kind of changed those spots. But to answer your question, essentially, yes, we are very foundationally ground up perspective from the economy. So you get the most investment from the least level of barrier to entry at the lower levels, and then they populate and support the higher chains of craft progression.
Nice. No, that's really good. That's always one of the biggest concerns with crafting systems is like, oh, you're a tier 1 crafter? Well, there's no more economy left for you. The server's on tier 6, that kind of a feeling. And I feel for that, man, because I love crafting systems. I'm super into that. We've actually got in our guild, we've got a whole ministry of acquisition and ministry of production that handle all of the acquiring and using of resources to build stuff. So knowing that we're going to be able to get new players in and they're always going to have something to do, they're always going to be valuable is incredibly good to me. That's very compelling. Please no region lots for Ashes. I actually think region locking for servers is a very good idea from a security perspective. And the reason why is if you region lock by price, you say you paid the Brazilian price, you play on the Brazilian servers, that means I cannot go make hundreds of accounts, pay the Brazilian price, and then have all those accounts go and jump on the U.S. servers and just flood it with bots, which is exactly what happens if you don't do that.
And just to be clear, the intent isn't to prevent a player in another region from purchasing access to, let's say, North America or Europe if they should so choose, but that in the price harmonization, they purchase lower pricing for their region specifically, and then they are delegated to those region servers. But if they wanted to play in North America or in Europe with their friends or whatever, they could purchase a North American or European subscription.
Yes, you can just buy the U.S. subscription if you want to play in U.S. servers. Easy.
That's right.
And that way you don't have bypassing of that by going to the region that has the cheapest price. It's generally going to be Brazil, Argentina, stuff like that. That's a very common tactic. We see that all the time. Yeah, normal stuff. Yeah. It's them protecting all the player base from those other regions from this type of bad activity while still giving a good price to players in those regions. This is one of the things that I saw and I was like, oh, I love that. I've talked about it all the time.
By the way, I know that your community is goblins.
Oh,
so
no.
I just would like introduce you to my friend here. This is a Pathfinder goblin.
That is fantastic.
Nice.
I'll put him kind of right back here so he can chill with us.
Goblins.
Goblin.
Actual goblins. Phenomenal. It's actually fantastic, team. Hell yeah. Yeah, stopping botters from getting the cheapest sub and wrecking the economy. Bingo. That's exactly what you want. I love that goblin, by the way. All right, what other questions you guys have? What kind of content is available for solo players? I actually get this question all the time, and I tell them, like, solo content is out there. I think the node system makes it so it's more accessible than it would be, say, in EVE. Like, you're not going to be able to go into, nullsec sovereign space and go and just farm rats there without getting pushed out. So I think the node system's more inclusive. But what other systems do you guys have in mind, either ones that are already in the game or ones that are not in the game, that makes it viable to do solo play, even though the game's not intended for that at all times?
Yeah. I think it's important to note that right now, our weakest loop, because it's missing many of the ancillary systems that support it, is not that we don't intend to provide a valid solo experience. Things are easier in a group, things are easier with friends. That is the intended experience. We are an MMO after all. So we are very conscientious to ensure that we are prioritizing group-based content, but we also want to provide a valid path for solo experience as well, because sometimes as a player, I experience this. I just want to go grind or do something on my own for the hour of time that I have and not eat up the 15 to 20 minutes it takes to integrate into a group or whatever, right? So that's something that's going to be bolstered as additional systems come online throughout phase 2 and 3. The solo experience now is the hardest it will ever be, which is okay for this phase. But yes, I mean, to answer your question, obviously, there are different progression paths. We talked about them with the social, the religious organizations, the nodes themselves, all the, there are narrative paths that are viable, solo paths. There will be hunting grounds in the overworld population that will be soloable more so than what you can experience right now. But you are encouraged to be part of a group perspective, right? You are encouraged to find one of the pseudo factions.
Ja sa obetujem. Ja sa obetujem za vás všetkých, stačí, keď mi pošlete $120 a ja si to kúpim a vyskúšam to za vás chat potom a budem to testovať dlho, aby to vyšlo krásne. Sľubujem chat.
And to be inducted into this social environment, that is obviously the strength that I believe MMOs have and set apart this genre from other genres of gaming. And so, we lean into that.
Nice. So here's kind of an off one, like off-topic normal one. Since we are doing wipes, and since you've said that the wipe is going to be December 20th, that's a planned wipe. There may be ones before that, maybe just in case. How do we retain our...
Tam už je roadmap, Peli, ale vieš o tom. Tam je to viac menej už rozplánované aj na Alfu 1, Alfa 2, Alfa 3 a aj na Beta Phase už. Takže ako jo, bude to proste povedzme minimálne rok, čo akoby ja ale práve akoby chcem, že to bude ako rok kontentu, čo môžem akoby už pomaly robiť a postupne to ako vidieť v tej vyvíjacej fázi a testovať to. A potom už keď sa to dostane akoby do toho releaseu, tak budem ready, akoby to malo byť za 3 roky, I don't give a fuck. Ja som presne ten človek, ktorý radšej bude čakať aj 10 rokov navíc. Mám v píči. Nebudem hrať nedokončenú hru, ako je 90% vydaných všetkých online hier za posledné roky. I don't give a fuck. Nech to kľudne trvá, aj dlhšie. I don't give a shit. Nech z toho vyjde potom masterpiece.
Character names between that. This is one that's going to affect me very directly because I'm a high-value target at that point. I've got an established name in the video game, and if someone snipes that name, am I out of luck? Are there systems in place to protect this? What happens?
So we have in the past, with our pack holders, provided name reservation mechanic.
Dúfam, že mi nikto nebudete brať moje meno, chat. Ak tam niekto bude vytvárať, keď vyjde tá hra, nejaké moje odnoše môjho mena a budú tam troliť, ja budem neskutočne vás zabíjať na pohľad.
Those aren't necessarily intended to be implemented, I think, until late into the phase 3, but I know that there was some discussion about it on,
ja sa práve Makvore že vyložene teším na to PvP proste.
On the web and ICS
to je ten faktor, na ktorý sa
teším. Whether or
teším.
not we could facilitate that a bit sooner, and then it would be a field essentially that you fill out in the back end of your account page for the website that would preserve based on a realm basis. So you would select a realm, you would input your reservation token essentially, and then that space would be reserved after the wipe.
Would you think that it would work if during the wipe, we just got a level 1 character with no gear with the same name, same archetype, everything?
No, what would happen is upon character creation after the wipe, you would be able to input the reserved name and it would be reserved for your account creation, your account character creation.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, as long as there's something in place, because I know now that there's streamers getting into it, there's also guild leaders on things. Like, there's so many different names that we can see out in the world, and we know them now. And that's something that's really interesting is even at this alpha phase, I go, I know that guy. I know that guy's guild. I know these people that are over there. And I know that if that wipes, someone's going to be like, I'm that guy now. Like that's a very tough thing to be. It's a tough thing to face against. And I know that mostly affects streamers. I know that is. So it's kind of more of a selfish ask to find out. But I know it's going to affect a lot of different figureheads around the server as well.
Yeah, I don't think that's just a streamer thing. Like you said, I think that's a guild leader thing. I mean, that's even an individual who's not a guild leader or a streamer that's just has a reputation, right?
Yeah.
And you want to a degree, allow some tools where people can preserve that reputation and not have it be, countermanded by somebody else.
A to je ďalší element, prečo by som sa akoby tam do toho chcel zapojiť akoby už teraz na nejakých tých, akoby proste už tam poznávať akoby tých ľudí na tých európskych serveroch nejaké tie proste tam ako skupinky a tak ako postupne niečo, kde ako rozumiete.
Narc could be the most wanted name. True. I could see that.
Narc, no.
I'm gonna steal
všetky odnože Asmongolda.
Actually, I'm gonna steal Narc's name.
If you flew around as Narc, I think that'd be hilarious. You should do that. Something comes up all the time. This has changed a couple times throughout alpha. Why did need and greed change from going into your bag to now doing it where you have to go and pick up the item? We're wondering what happened there. Was there something you guys were trying to combat? Because now when you need it, you still have to go pick it up off the ground, which is a little bit awkward. What's the intended design there? Was that a stopgap? Was it a leapfrog thing?
The intended design is twofold. One, on an engineering side, there was
zamávajte gábuške.
Some concern about preserving the rights currently based off of net relevancy and distance. So we tried to cut down the time that you could roll need or greed. And then we also introduced a pause to the public loot rights timer on the loot container. But more so on the design side of it, part of, I think, the PVX engagement of an environment is not just, let's say, killing the mini boss or killing the boss or killing the creatures, but it is controlling the space after that to the point where you can ensure when that rolling is complete that you have access to the loot container to claim the reward as well. And that other players could potentially kill you during that process and wait until the loot container goes to a public permission setting. We were having situations where, players could sit in a node or sit in a town in a raid or in a party and be granted the reward being nowhere near the loot container. So as an interim solution, we incorporated this needing to interact with the loot container after successfully passing the rolls. And, we're going to test with that and see how that goes with certain PBX situations.
I didn't know that the item would, like the loot container would become public. We just knew that you won the loot roll, but suddenly everyone in the raid could loot it. What the hell's going on? So we didn't know that. That actually wasn't, I didn't realize that was the intended mechanic. Well, Knowing that now is very interesting.
Yeah, think about this scenario. You are in a group. You're in a room and you have a mini boss in front of you and you're killing the mini boss, and you have another group that's kind of watching you do that. And as the mini boss dies, you see the visual effects indicator that this big golden, stream is coming off the body. Immediately, the contending group says, "Oh shit, there's a item drop that's of legendary quality on this thing. Quick, everybody, kill them all so they can't grab the container, and we will try to preserve this space until the looting rights lapse and it becomes public." In my opinion, that to me is the ultimate kind of paradigm of opportunity eliciting PvP encounter. And that also then stimulates the potential for political engagement.
Je proste kombinované PvPčko s tým PvEčkom a to bol presne akoby tie časy, kde v tom Lineage sa fakt ako dali proste takéto veci ako dobre načasovať s partou a niečo.
Revenge, whatever, all the things that go to contributing to a player-driven, emergent, interaction Will it suck if you die and you lose access to it? Yes. I mean, that's the bite of failure. Should we protect you from that bite of failure by letting the roll complete and you then just auto-magically getting the item in your inventory? Or do we preserve this idea of kind of, PVX interaction?
Yeah, and I see a lot of people, some people saying W,
Yeah,
some
dobre,
people
môže,
saying
jo.
bad mechanic. Let me give you a story that I have from my history in EVE, right? We lost a structure called a Forta Zone. Structures in EVE Online, the player-based structures, they have a core
Gabča mi
inside of
donesla
them. This is worth a
pizzové
shitload
pečivo
of
z
in-game
Lidlu,
money.
let's
It's
go.
called ISK, right? And when that structure dies, it always drops the core. We got double-crossed by a group that was going to be there when we destroyed that structure that was going to either protect us or help us to make sure we extracted our cores. When we got double crossed, they started fighting all of us off the point so that they can take the core for them.
To týpek je jeden z najväčších jako EVE overlordov, ty vole pomalej, čo tam jako existovali, no.
Themselves, because it's worth a lot of ISK. It's worth a lot of money in game. At the last moment, Kronos actually flew in and grabbed the core and escaped before they could get him. It was hilarious, and it's a moment that I will never forget in the game because that was the moment where it's like, oh my God, everyone's fighting. There's hundreds of players here locked in battle, and he goes, whoa, and just flies off, and it was hilarious. So, like, even though it may suck when these types of things don't go your way, it is a story in a social sandbox game that stays with you forever. And that is the important part. That day we won, there were other days where we lost. And I don't forget those because the game didn't generate those moments. We did. And that's a story that players get to tell that you can't get in other types of games.
That is absolutely correct. And I'll give you another
Хорошо.
example. I was playing. I don't know if you ever played Arcage, but I was playing in Arcage, and I told you about how we would own all the kind of bosses for the first 6 months of the server. But eventually, it got to a tipping scale where both factions were fighting us because we had just completed the Kraken raid. And the Kraken, this was like our 76th straight Kraken that we had done. It spawned once every like 3 days or something.
Oh, Jesus.
And I know. And when you do that, you can loot obviously the corpse, and you got the reward. But it would also spawn these crates of tentacles that would live in the water. And those crates, you had to like grab them, put them on your back, or put them in the merchant ship, or put them in your tractor, or whatever. And then you could take them and turn them in, and they would give you each person like 100 some odd gold. Well, in order to do that, you had to successfully make it back to the location. And you had to control the area in which it was kind of like this lingering zone of a battlefield where, I kid you not, we had all these frigates, and we just completed the Kraken. And there was like 300 of us, and there was like 600 of our opponents. And this battle was over probably like 5 square kilometers or 10 square kilometers in sea. And it was just almost 20 hours straight of PvP, constantly picking up and dropping these tentacles to try to grab them to take them back. I went to bed for 2 hours in the middle of that fight and came back and was back on my ship, captaining the ship, trying to help the fight. But like, that experience cannot be curated. It is impossible to design as compelling of an interaction between players as emergent as the need to control the battlefield. And like it or not, a PVX game everywhere is a battlefield. Even if you're killing that boss, even if you're killing that mini boss, you're controlling a room in a dungeon, or you're, whatever you're doing, there is someone else who looks at that opportunity, who looks at that scarcity of resource, who looks at that political engagement, and they say, I woke up this morning choosing violence. And that's an okay thing to do, right? We want to preserve that type of call to action. And in my opinion, this specific mechanic, albeit, on the smaller scale, is lending towards that need to not just accomplish the thing, but to control the battlefield for a limited period of time afterwards to ensure you reap the reward. Now, does that mean that we're not going to potentially change things? No, of course. Like, we take into account player feedback, we take into account data. How often is it happening that the party who has the looting rights doesn't get the reward? Like if it doesn't strike the balance we're looking for and it feels like the players aren't engaging it with the way that we want them to, that's the whole purpose of alpha and beta, is that we get to inspect these design decisions and we
Vyskúšať,
get to
testovať,
adjust them appropriately
otočiť.
to ensure that the intended consequence, the intended design is being manifest.
I'm really happy to hear that, because Flashpoint PvP and like zone-based PvP is something I always really enjoyed. Eve kind of pushes that with structures, where as you break down a structure, you can't just kill it all at once. These are player-based buildings, right? What you have to do is you have to place it, and then there's an onlining phase. There's an anchoring phase. That creates a let's hold down this location. Then it comes out of that, and there's a shield phase. People can break the shield, and it sets off a timer. Then there's an armor phase. Then there's a structure phase. And the structure phase at that point is, if you don't save it now, it's dead. It's over, right? So you have to save it, and then it can repair itself back up, and it's a big deal. So like these types of things create contests at those moments where it matters, where things can be lost permanently. And I love that. I always love that kind of a thing. I think the thing that I see the most in this right now is the caravan system. Having this kind of mobile PvP zone around the map with risk in and of
Tie
itself.
karavany sa mi tiež páčia, že proste budeš vidieť, akoby, že niekde je karavan a môžeme sa proste potom dohodnúť ako partaj, proste tam vyrabovať nejaký iný karavan niekoho, alebo tak.
With that. How do you see that evolving out to be something that is either more compelling or is, do you think you guys want to expand on that? Do you want to have other types of things like that in the world beyond just node-based stuff? Anything with like guild structures, anything else that does that?
Yeah. Obviously our war structures do that. Our node to node reputation systems can allow for those types of things to occur. The node war system spawns PvP events that are high stakes rewards for the participants. I think the caravan structure is kind of this moving target of opportunity that can also be a bit of a cat and mouse game as well, depending on the strategy you employ in moving that caravan, or the espionage that you have available to you in, counterplay the route that's being chosen. That'll extend obviously out into the naval components as well when it comes to merchant ships and the routes that are possible, and engaging with harbor systems that uses the same tech. The idea here is that players can obviously engage in the theft and or conflict that arises around the movement of goods and resources through the world. They're not just movement of good and resources. They're also intended to provide necessary like node-based resources, which don't necessarily exist in the hands of players, but are the accrued effect of taxation and or buy orders and mayoral commissions that then can be used to build up certain buildings and services and utilize certain policies within the node structures. So even if you're not necessarily taking something from other players, you are preventing or blocking certain node relationships from reaping the benefit of progression, which is a necessary tactic in how certain nodes interface with the vassal system, because nodes can block other nodes from progression should they succeed in those endeavors. So, yeah.
No, that's good. I think that's a really good choice, man. Like, all this it's funny because a lot of these systems, it's very clear that you guys have thought them through very much. It's very clear that you are a player of these types of video games. And I think that was one of the things a lot of people are afraid of, man. Like, I really do.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people see usually game directors or CEOs or anything this kind of stuff as being very disconnected from the gaming world. Not understanding how these games are played, not being a player of these, not understanding what's compelling about these types of systems.
Presne sme potrebovali čakať tie roky až na Stevena, aby niekto, kto vyrástol na tých hrách, potom zbohatol a mal peniaze na to, aby jednu takúto poriadnu hru urobil.
Really approach it from how am I selling a product, not how am I making a video game.
Yeah. No, and again, I think, absolutely, you're 100% right. And the great thing about this kind of transparent development process, we started back at the end of 2016 in developing Ashes, back when we only had like 10 people on the team. And, I was going through and writing up all of these kind of designs that are predicated across the games that, I personally have experienced and that I felt would mesh well in creating this kind of sand park environment that players have an opportunity to, engage with. And then as the team grows and we flesh out these ideas and these designs, we make sure that we're keeping that central vision. And this harkens back to your original question. What is my role, on the project? I am a rudder. I am essentially the person who ensures that where all designs and ideas kind of come up and trickle up through, this idea of a single point of understanding what is the intended gameplay experience and design that needs to maintain cohesion. And that's really the strength, I think, of our organization, of our project, is that you can go through the wiki, you can click on the references back to the videos in 2017 and 18 where I'm talking about these same topics, and now you're seeing those designs implemented within the game and playing them and giving feedback on them. We don't change our identity year after year like a lot of projects do, where they don't have that strong of a rudder. And that's not I'm not trying to cast any shadows on any other team or any other project or whatever. I think that's fine. There's a lot of very successful projects that do change their identity, answer the call of the market. But I think we've embraced this idea that our product isn't going to be for everyone. And that is okay. It is speaks.
Nice, to je to prostě ten najlepší prístup, presne. On to nemá byť ani úplne pre všetkých, ale pre tých, čo budú akoby tento žáner enjoyovať, to bude masterpiece. Hopefully.
To the integrity of the design intent, when you know who your audience is and you know who your core group of players are going to be, and you build for that. And the wider you go, the more diluted that becomes, and the more opportunity you have to please no one. And that's obviously not what we're trying to accomplish.
I'm really happy to hear that. I think one of the biggest things that I said at the beginning of this was there's many companies that'll be like, it's pissing players off. Maybe we should change everything to fit that. And even things like banning players, like, maybe we shouldn't ban those players. They're the top guild. And if we ban them, then it might piss off lots of people and they won't play the game. It's like, no, they're being toxic or they're exploiting or things like that. People like that need to be banned. And if you don't do that, then it ends up turning into a failure point for the rest of the community and you start losing people out of the community. I think that's the thing that's the scariest option. It's the same thing with this, is if you guys have a core vision for the game, you want the game to be like this, there's a number of players that resonate with this, and then you fold on that, no one's going to be happy at that point, Yep. Let's get another PvP toggle, please. No. Oh yeah,
No.
let's talk about naval warfare. We're a bunch of pirates. It's the actual Pirates Guild. We'd like to know about naval warfare.
Yeah, I think I probably handle this one in 2 minutes.
All right.
We have a lot of systems that are intended for naval gameplay. Right now in Alpha 2, you can experience some limited functionality with regards to kind of vehicles and ships on the water. That's through our caravan raft system. That is a very simple implementation of the rudimentary kind of, vehicle mechanics that we want to demonstrate. However, long-term goal is that our naval system incorporates a lot of different ship designs that have variable component design to them as well. So you can attach certain type of siege weaponry on the ships against other ships. You can attach certain types of shit. I forgot what they're called.
Certain types of shit. You heard it here first, folks.
Certain types of shit. No, utility items on the ship to kind of address different situations. These are mainly allowed through our harbor system. You get recipes for ships, you construct the ships, and then the important thing is that if your ship gets destroyed, you're respawning at a harbor. So there are definitive victory points that exist out within the ocean. And that is something that we want to make sure, players have to be kind of careful about their ships, because losing a ship is something that is very, very important, very costly, has a lot of resource requirements and sink. And it sets your...
Jak mi někdo z vás potopí našu ty vole cirkusanskú loď potom niekedy za tie 3 roky, čet, ja si vás nájdem.
Your raid or your group back to the start, which makes the ocean engagements kind of definitive.
I'm just going to be real with you. I am going to ransom so many ships. Oh. I mean, we got a whole fleet here and you got one guy. Just pay us for passage and we might let you pass. Or you don't. It's your choice.
I love it. There's another important concept with naval that was introduced a few years ago, and that was open seas mechanic, which is essentially everyone in the open seas is flagged.
How does the server handle that at that point? Do you guys just have to get even more mesh servers out there to be able to handle all the different areas of sea?
No, we have a solution that is still being tested, and bugs are getting kind of worked out in it. It's down in under our dev branch, but it's a dynamic server meshing. So depending on how player densities move throughout the world, those server regions will condense or expand to accommodate the densities. So our servers kind of follow the player density around the world. That's how we kind of get around, moving players through the open world.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I like that. Social systems aren't really in yet. You've got alpha phase 1, dude. Nah. Like, that stuff is all slated, I believe, for phase 3.
Čo to je, ale my sa dostávame normálne aj ku koncu. Posledných 10 minút videa, čo to je, my to zvládneme, chat, be strong.
Where we intend to have certain things land. Of course, that intention is subject to change based off of how we need to react to more emergent and pressing bugs and issues that come up in the previous phases. But you can check that roadmap out, and it does have kind of the different systems listed.
So here's a really interesting one. It's very specific. There's a lot of people that are very, very interested in fishing, and I know this as well. There's people that just get...
Ovec, ty už si tam vypisoval normálne, ale na fóra zase, že? Proste to je jasný. Fishing enjoyers. To je proste normálne jedna sorta, ktorá v každej jednej hre musí proste mať fishing.
Just wildly into fishing. How deep do you guys want to take the fishing system? Because I know, like, there are things like certain weather events, certain times of day, certain areas of the map. Like, what are all these types of components that you're interested in adding to fishing? Because I love that stuff too.
Absolutely. I mean, fishing is definitely a treasured favorite amongst a lot of MMO gamers.
Well, it doesn't have fishing. It's not an MMO. Let's be honest.
That's right.
True.
I'm a big fan of fishing. Our goal with fishing is twofold. We kind of want to have one side of fishing be, location-based freshwater fishing that is a bit more AFK related, having the necessary bait, being able to kind of pick locations and resource
AFK
nodes
style,
that exist around the world for
dôležité.
different types of fish. And then we want to kind of have a more sports fishing, interactive gameplay layer that's a part of the fishing. And we might extend some of that gameplay layer to the freshwater fishing, but this is really something that's intended to be out in the open seas, out in the open water. These are massive fish that will relate to our crate system and how we move crates in caravans and in merchant ships. So we intend to have certain type of fishing ship designs that are better at finding those spots throughout the open seas.
Pôjdeme loviť veľryby, kurva fix.
Where players will have limited resources to engage with those. They'll have like chum mechanics that they need to leverage. They'll have different types of components that can be equipped on the ship that benefit that type of fish finding. And my idea here is that we have a really compelling loop for what fishing is. And I know the econ team is very aligned with that perspective as well.
Are you telling me I can go out and steal a man's crab pots and get marked for PvP? Is that what I'm...
Well, to be clear, the open seas, and that's anywhere that's not on land, right? This is basically like not freshwater, not on continent, but as you go out into the open seas, the ocean, this is a open PvP ground, right? So
it's lawless,
So everybody's flagged for PvP. There's no corruption mechanics that occur in the open seas.
Niečo ako wild, proste wilds v Runescape, neviem, jak to volalo.
Opt-in place a zone. It's kind of similar to like Zero Sec, as you said, that also has high-end resources available.
Yeah, it's null-sec gameplay. So if you're an EVE player, any of the lawless zones are basically null-sec. It is not full loot PvP in those areas, though, so it's not full loot, but you kill people and you get materials, right?
Correct. Yep.
We actually want to go and take one of those areas of the map when it becomes available. I think that comes out December 20th, so phase 2. Is we're going to be going out and trying to get into, what is the top left zone called? The one with the islands out there?
The Coral Seas?
Or
the one, Turquoise Sea. Sorry, Turquoise Sea.
I think it's the one that's just opening up, the next node, because it's already there, and we went over there, and it's got like Lawless Zone already on it. Heck's the name of this place?
Yeah.
It's the one that has Wind and Sea as the kind of node name for it.
I mean, the Turquoise Sea is what's up in the top left area.
Tropics?
the
Vandegar
tropics.
Tropics?
That's the biome.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the biome name. It's the
Okay.
Vandegar Tropics. The Vandegar is the name of the continent. The tropics is the biome, and then the specific zone name is the turquoise sea.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Yeah, no, I don't know how expansive those areas get. One of the things I was talking to people in the game, you've got 55 kilometers of space right now, square kilometers, right? And what is the intended size of the overall game? Because we know it's going to go from 5 total nodes right now up to 85 plus 15 more for fortresses. That's what I've been hearing.
Yeah. I believe our total size is 1,200 square kilometers overall. I think that was
Bez fast travelu 1200 km štvorcových jakoby v hre. OK, chat, tak náhodou jakoby si urobíte barák na druhej strane sveta týždeň k sebe cestovať.
was where we last left it, and that's probably about 800 square kilometers of playable space on land, roughly. But obviously, it's a big world. Even in the Riverlands right now, it's a big world, and this is partly in contribution to what we talked about earlier with regards to Zergs and like the ability to fast travel. The movement of resources through this world is a very important component of how the world develops. And in order for that to matter, you have to have a lot of playable space. Now, one thing to note is our target goal is 8 to 10,000 concurrent users per realm. That's a lot of space, even for 8 to 10,000 concurrent users. However, it is my expectation that we could go higher than that based off of how our dynamic server gridding works. So depending on how that feels, we might be...
Teraz akoby zatiaľ akoby by, už 8 až 10 tisíc ľudí na jeden ten ako realm alebo server je asi ako OK, záleží koľko ich akoby takto bude dobre ako živených.
Able to go above the 8 to 10,000 value per realm. We're just going to have to see how that goes.
Yeah, and to be clear, just so you guys understand, you've got EVE Online usually averages between 18,000 and 28,000 total active concurrent players at the same time. So when you're talking about 10,000 concurrent players, that's a hell of a lot of players. That's not a small amount. That's very, very, very big. Yeah. Please no sharding. There was no intention, as far as I knew, to shard any people out.
Je to prostě ale teda rozbíša by to kurva veľa, ne? Prostě na tých serveroch podľa mňa, keď si pamätám, ja neviem, niekto zaspomínajte na nejaké New Worldy alebo takéto veci, tak to bolo pomaly po litry alebo po niečom takom tie servery, ne?
From like one area to another area and make them, not in the same phase. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? That's all from the meshing side, yeah.
Yeah, no, we don't use
layers, none of that, no.
We don't use layers or, phasing. What we do is we have a glorious network team, Anton, Adam, Zach, and Alex and Ish. They're phenomenal network engineers. And what we have built is obviously the server meshing technology where, we've rewritten kind of the back end for Unreal in order to serve our needs from a concurrent user population perspective as well as player density. And we also have a tech that's called dynamic server meshing, which is still going through bug testing and isn't yet fully implemented in phase 1. However, we are using the gridding technology. And what happens is as player densities go up, those grids of authority will contract or expand, and new workers, as we call them server workers, will be added to the grid to accommodate additional spaces as required. These are kind of pre-spooled server workers. And then obviously we have the standard kind of, replication mitigation. As density goes higher in certain spaces, we start bringing in call distances. We start limiting, actors that replicate, how many of them can replicate at once. Like there are things that we use as server frame rate starts to decline and those densities get up in the hundreds and hundreds of players within a particular space. So, all those things combined give us great confidence that we can deliver on a massively multiplayer experience.
That's awesome. So I've got 2 questions left for you. So we're at the end of it. Of all the systems that are coming up, what is the one that you specifically are most interested in? The one you are excited about? Not excited about for the players, excited for you.
I think probably Node and Castle Sieges. I think those are a level of kind of gameplay loops that are more architected towards an end game experience that players can repeat and that have ramifications and rewards that are compelling and keep players invested. I think we have some plans to stand up some bare siege mechanics for nodes and eventually castles within phase 2 that we'll be testing. And I'm excited to see
Nějaké
players interact with that.
katapulty,
That's
věci,
awesome.
ty
You know,
vole,
I'm
nice.
really excited to that. I'm interested in seeing the castle system, like how those nodes, the castle nodes, are going to work. I was also really interested in like how the underground of the world works too, because I know there's like a whole underground region, and I was reading the wiki and it said that there might be nodes down there, and I was like, oh man, living underground would be kind of cool. You just pop up out of the ground because like
Underrealm, yes.
one of the places we live in
Underground
was a
messed
place
all,
called
let's go.
Potchvin, and the way that it got formed is we actually stole stars in these PvP, PvE events that happened around the universe. We pushed them to our faction, and then there was a gigantic galaxy-wide event where all of them were whisked away into like a pocket dimension area, wormhole space, and it formed our own galaxy cluster up there, and we could leave that area through wormholes to go back to the world. And that underground place very much so mimics that kind of feeling to me, where if we lived underground, we could just pop up and be like PvP and then like disappear back under the ground, you know, and like that's very much wormhole to me. So I'm interested in that kind of stuff later on. That's the one I'm most excited for.
The Underrealm is definitely going to be a lot of fun. We had some semblance of the Underrealm in Alpha 1. We're waiting for some additional features on the dynamic server gridding in order to stack regional authority for these server workers on top of each other. So for the Underrealms to not share with the overground area. And I agree with you. Like obviously the purpose of those spaces is to provide alternate routes that might be dangerous in different ways, but don't have the same types of choke points that the overground routes have for things like trade and encounter design. I think that it's a very compelling space.
Yeah, I'm super into that. And I think the last one the community really wants to know is, what about the ferret wish? For those who don't know, I was teleported to the top of a tower, and I had to answer a riddle, and I answered that riddle correctly, and I was given the chance to do a wish, and I said, I want ferrets in the video game. And the wish was granted.
I think that ferrets are definitely a very cool idea, and we'll just have to wait a little bit and see what time tells.
Nice. Fredino sa prišiel pozrieť ešte na koniec videa. Fredino, my sme zvládli dvojhodinovú ty vole reakciu, to na dvojhodinové video.
And like, I'm super down with this. I love the way that the game is going. You guys are doing a great job, and I can, you know, say that for me. And I'm having a blast in this. I think I'm clocking like 50 hours now in the last 9 days of the gameplay that we have here. And I'm excited December 20th so we can play it even more. So thank you very much.
I thank you for having me. I enjoyed it. I enjoy watching you play. Like I said, it's a very awesome, fresh breath of air to hear you speak both from a developer's perspective and helping to kind of, you know, navigate knowledge of what a true alpha looks like for a game. You know, we have definitely overcome our hurdles of doubt over time when it comes to realizing this grand vision for an MMORPG like Ashes. And, you know, having someone like yourself that is just capable of answering questions from a very personable and relatable perspective is a huge help for us to better communicate what goes into making a game of this size, what goes into creating the level of systems complexity that we're trying to achieve with Ashes. So huge props to you and to your community of goblins and fellow pirates. You are very much welcome in the Ashes community. We appreciate you guys very much and love having you as a part of this experience.
Well, thank you very much. And like, legitimately, I think the biggest thing is, like we were talking about earlier, there are so many people that have seen alphas that don't make sense. They've seen betas that don't make sense. They've seen these types of releases where it's 3 days of an alpha. It's 5 days of a beta. And it's just like, that's not what these are. And I think the worst part about it is you get this sort of education that is instilled in people. It kind of poisons the wording, you know, and they stick with that forever and they don't know what a real alpha is. And then they get something like this and they're like, that area looks bad. And it's like, yeah, it's an alpha. And they go, so it comes out next week, right? And it's like, no. You know, and you have to, it's like re-educating people about what this term is supposed to mean, you know, and that's such a wild thing to see of how far that's gone because AAA has abused that. They've abused the term, you know.
Absolutely.
So this is good, man. And I think you guys are doing the right thing. I can't wait to keep playing this as it goes forward. And the biggest thing is go put in bug reports, dudes. Like, do that.
That is right.
I put in like another 10 today. You know. Well, it was lovely having you on, and I'll see you around, man.
Right. Bye, everybody.
To bola ale úplne absolútna jako pecka, čo sa týka rozhovoru, protože takto sa žiadny iný akoby head alebo game director a nikto akoby v tejto dobe a v tomto roku proste nespráva akoby k svojej komunite alebo k tej svojej hre a tak podobne. Proste vidieť, že je to za mňa úplne brutálne ako passion project, ale proste vo veľkom. Oni vám tu akoby odkaz priamo na to video u Pirate Softwarea a priame, kde bolo akoby celý ten 2-hodinový rozhovor. Ale prelúskali sme sa celým tým 2-hodinovým rozhovorom tých informácií, ktoré mi normálne teraz akoby pribudli do mozku. No je ich proste kurva veľa.